The document now in your hands is the proposal on adjusting One Group's board structure and optimizing the strategic consultant position. Felix Pei stood before the projection screen, his voice calm and steady, as if he were reading an ordinary quarterly report. The papers were passed down one by one. Finally, they reached the very end of the long table. Adrian Shaw reached out and took one. He lowered his eyes. Then his knuckles slowly tightened. The first page was written very politely. Optimize governance structure. Improve decision-making efficiency. Clarify authority and responsibility boundaries. Compress redundant consultant positions. Every phrase sounded professional. And every phrase aimed its blade at him. The conference room was full. A 12-person table. At the main seat, Vivian Wen wore a sharply tailored dark suit, with the president's nameplate placed before her. The other 11 seats were occupied. Except for Adrian Shaw's strategic consultant seat, which carried no voting rights, every board member was present. No one whispered. No one looked surprised. The room was so quiet it felt like an execution rehearsed long ago. Adrian turned to the second page. There was a statistics table. Adoption rate of strategic proposals over the past 3 years. Behind it were more than a dozen entries. Not adopted. Shelved. Rejected. He stared for 2 seconds, then suddenly laughed. Very softly. So softly it was almost only breath. Because that statistics table did not mention the West City warehouse acquisition. That was the layout he had forced through against 3 bidding rivals, saving One Group 80 million yuan in cash flow. It did not mention the southern raw material chain switch either. After that battle, One Group's profit margin rose 4 percentage points that year. It did not mention last year's overseas OEM divestment, which the board had called reckless. Without that early loss cutting, the group would now have a 10-digit hole in its books. Every proposal that had been adopted was erased. Every proposal that had been rejected remained. A trap laid to this level was no longer targeting. It was cleansing. As everyone can see. Felix tapped the screen lightly, his voice gentle, carrying a restrained sharpness. Over the past 3 years, Consultant Shaw has attended board meetings and participated in certain strategic discussions. However, judging from actual results, he has long failed to provide stable, effective, and executable strategic contribution to the group. To promote company reform and reduce decision-making costs, I propose that Adrian Shaw's strategic consultant seat be revoked, along with his right to attend future meetings. He paused deliberately. Several board members lowered their heads and looked at the documents. No one spoke. Silence was alignment. Adrian closed the file and placed it back on the table. His movements were steady. From the moment he entered, he had known something was wrong. The board meeting had been announced only 30 minutes in advance. A sudden agenda item. No secretariat process. No pre-review of materials. Yet Felix Pei had prepared the wording this tightly, even down to statistical attachments. This was not an impulse. It was a net already woven. All they had waited for was him sitting down inside it. And the person who personally tightened that net sat at the main seat. She had not looked at him once. President Wen. One board member cleared his throat and asked tentatively, "Should we allow Consultant Shaw to give an explanation first?" Vivian finally lifted her eyes. Her gaze moved from the document to Adrian, but it landed on him like he was only an irrelevant name. The proposal is very clear. Her voice was calm, with not a trace of emotion. This is a board meeting, not a defense hearing. If anyone has objections to the data, raise them now. If not, move directly to discussion. One sentence killed even the last bit of procedural dignity. The room became quieter. Felix stood at her right and smoothly took over. Reform always makes some people uncomfortable. But a company does not operate on sentiment. What brought One Group to where it is today is efficiency, professionalism, and unified execution. Not what one person did in the past. When he said this, his peripheral gaze swept over Adrian with undisguised contempt. As if telling everyone, this person should leave the stage. Adrian looked at him with flat eyes. 7 years. He had blocked financing crises for One Group. Carried it through supply chain ruptures. And in the most chaotic years, he had turned an acquisition case on the edge of bankruptcy back into profit. But today, no one sitting here mentioned any of it. Not even Vivian. And she knew it best. Back then, when One Group was at its most difficult point, she had invited him into the company herself. She had said one group lacked someone who could hold the situation steady. Later, they married. The news was kept tightly controlled. Not many people in the company knew. After that, he stepped behind the scenes. No real power title. No public authority. He did the dirtiest, hardest judgment calls for her. He resisted the board for her. He blocked knives from outside for her. He thought that was fulfillment. Now, it looked more like it had simply made it convenient for her to cut him away today. If there are no objections, I will add a few more points. Felix turned to the next page, his tone growing even more relaxed. The strategic consultant position has long suffered from unclear authority and responsibility, affecting management boundaries. Second, consultant Shaw's proposal adoption rate has remained low for 3 consecutive years, meaning the position is no longer necessary. Third, the company's next stage will involve capital structure optimization and requires a more unified strategic voice. Capital structure optimization. The moment Adrian heard those words, his eyes finally darkened. This was not ordinary personnel removal. They wanted to pull him out of the company completely, then swallow the structures he had left behind. He lifted his eyes and looked at Vivian. "Is this your intention?" This was the first time he had spoken tonight. His voice was not loud. But the entire room tightened under it. Several board members looked up almost at the same time. They were waiting to see how Vivian would answer. Vivian only carefully placed her pen beside the file. Her expression did not move. "This is a board proposal. It does not target private relationships." Private relationships. Those 4 words struck bone like the back of a knife. Adrian stared at her. Suddenly, he found it funny. So even the skin of husband and wife, she was unwilling to leave that intact. Felix answered quickly, "Consultant Shaw, this is the company. We are discussing responsibilities, not emotions. You are worthy of discussing responsibility with me?" Adrian finally looked at him. His tone was not heavy, but it landed like a slap. "You've been at one group for 1 year. How many real projects have you completed? Don't you know?" Felix's face changed slightly, then darkened. "At least I don't occupy a position without producing results." "Results?" Adrian leaned back in his chair and tapped the statistics table. "Delete all adopted proposals, separately list all the ones you rejected, stamp it, and call that results. Felix Pay, before you learn how to make reports, learn how to be a human being." The air in the room became tense. Several board members exchanged glances. No one spoke, but everyone heard the fire in his words. Felix had not expected Adrian to tear open the trap in front of everyone. "If you question the authenticity of the materials, you may apply for review." He paused, then changed direction. "But the outcome will not change. The market does not look at sentiment. And the board does not look at seniority." "Well said." Adrian nodded. His gaze returned to Vivian's face. "What about you, Vivian 1? This was the first time tonight he had called her by full name. The woman at the head of the table finally showed a tiny change. Her fingers paused. Only for an instant. "Watch the occasion," she said. No explanation. No denial. And certainly not a single fair word for him. At that moment, the last thing inside Adrian's heart that had not fully died went completely cold. He suddenly understood. Today, she was not being manipulated by Felix. She was not forced. It was not a misunderstanding. She had chosen her side with clear eyes. She chose Felix. She chose the board. She chose to kick him out. Adrian said nothing more. He opened the proposal again and scanned page after page. The language was polished. The logic was tight. Even legal risks had been avoided in advance. Who led it, who reviewed it, who persuaded the board members? Every link had been designed beautifully. Beautiful indeed. So beautiful that even he could not find a major procedural flaw. And so beautiful it made him furious. 7 years of restraint. 7 years of retreat. And what he received was not a dignified separation. It was being publicly nailed as long-term ineffective trash. That fire in his chest was pressed down again and again. In the end, it became only a very soft cold laugh. The calmer he looked, the more uneasy the room became. No one could read what he was thinking. Felix was the first to stabilize. He looked at Vivian directly. "President 1, I suggest we enter the voting process." Vivian nodded. "Does any board member have further objections?" No one answered. She lowered her eyes to the voting sheet and spoke in a businesslike tone. Since there are no objections, we will now vote on the proposal on adjusting one group's board structure and optimizing the strategic consultant position. Those in favor, please raise your hands. Her voice fell. The conference room was silent for 1 second. Then Vivian raised her hand first. The movement was fast. Clean. Without any hesitation. Adrian looked at that hand. His eyes sank cold. After her, the other board members raised their hands one after another. 1, 2, 3. In the end, all 11 hands were raised. No abstentions. No opposition. Unanimous approval. When the final board member raised his hand, Adrian saw Vivian turn slightly and give Felix the briefest glance. Felix said nothing. He only nodded almost imperceptibly. That kind of tacit understanding was not spontaneous. It was the ease born of countless prior confirmations. Adrian suddenly understood everything. He sat at the end of the table, without voting rights, forced to watch the public execution carried out against him. Resolution approved. Vivian withdrew her hand, her voice still stable. Effective immediately, Adrian Shaw's strategic consultant seat and future attendance qualifications are revoked. Legal and HR will complete the related procedures. She paused. At last, she looked directly at him. But what came from her mouth was colder than not looking at him at all. Thank you for your contribution to the company over these years. Mr. Shaw, the door is this way. Mr. Shaw. Those 2 words publicly stripped away the last dignity. Several board members lowered their heads, pretending to organize documents. No one dared step into the scene. No one wanted to speak for him. Adrian sat for 2 seconds. Then he stood. The chair legs made a faint sound against the floor. It was not sharp. But everyone instinctively held their breath. He did not lose his temper. Did not throw documents. He did not even look at Felix again. He simply closed his black notebook, screwed the cap back onto his pen, and placed both neatly into his briefcase. Then he smoothed the cuff of his suit and straightened his tie. His movements were unhurried. So steady it seemed he was not being driven out, but voluntarily ending a boring meeting. And because of that, people's hearts tightened even more. Felix looked at him and suppressed his discomfort with a forced light laugh. Consultant Shaw, no, I should call you Mr. Shaw now. In the future, when group's strategic direction will not trouble you anymore. Adrian finally turned to him. You had better pray you can carry it. Felix's smile froze for half a second. What do you mean? Nothing. Adrian lifted his briefcase. But his gaze passed over Felix and landed on Vivian. President 1, good luck. Vivian's brow tightened almost invisibly. She did not like his tone. It was too calm. Calm like the sea before a storm. If you have objections, you may follow formal procedures, she said coldly. But now, please leave. I will. Adrian nodded and walked toward the door. The sound of his shoes on the floor was clear and steady. One step after another. As if stepping on every person's chest. When he reached the door, his hand rested on the handle. But he did not open it immediately. Everyone in the conference room looked at his back. He did not turn around. His voice was light. But it lowered the temperature in the entire room. Vivian 1, come to the company early tomorrow. The woman at the main seat finally frowned. What are you trying to say? Adrian showed half of his face. The corner of his mouth pulled into a shallow arc. It did not look like a smile. More like a final warning. Tomorrow, there may be some changes. Then he opened the door and walked out. The door closed behind him. Click. The sound was light. So light it could barely be heard. But after it fell, no one in the room spoke immediately. It was as if everyone had been pressed down by the words, some changes. Felix was the first to break the silence. His tone carried deliberate ease. Only bluffing. A removed consultant. What change can he make? Several board members looked at one another and echoed a few words. Yes. Without the company, he can't create much trouble. Just finish the procedures. No need to care. Vivian sat at the main seat. Her eyes remained on the closed door. Her fingers unconsciously pressed against the edge of the document. She knew Adrian Shaw was not a man who made empty threats. If he truly wanted to do something, he usually did not say anything in advance. But today, he had said it. Felix saw her hesitation and leaned closer, lowering his voice. Vivian, don't let him affect you. The board approved it unanimously. The situation is settled. The company is ours now. Vivian was silent for 2 seconds. At last, she withdrew her gaze. The coldness on her face closed together again. Just a consultant. She turned to the final page of the voting document and signed her name. Her pen strokes were crisp. No pause. If he's gone, he's gone. Outside the window, night sank heavily. The whole One Group building was brightly lit. In the elevator mirror, Adrian stood straight. No trace of disgrace showed on his face. Only the hand gripping his briefcase had white knuckles. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of retreat. 7 years of propping up the empire for her. Tonight, she personally reduced all of it to one line: if he's gone, he's gone. The elevator numbers fell floor by floor. Ding! The first floor. The doors opened slowly. Adrian walked out and took out his phone. He opened an encrypted contact list pinned at the top, untouched for a long time, and calmly dialed a number. The call connected quickly. He said only one sentence. "You can begin." Then he put away the phone and walked into the night without looking back. Night wind swept across the entrance of One Group Tower. Adrian raised his hand and stopped a black car. The moment the car door closed, his phone vibrated. Only one encrypted receipt appeared on the screen, notice synchronized. Execution at 8 o'clock sharp. He looked at it, turned off the screen, leaned back in the rear seat, and said nothing. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror and asked quietly, "Mr. Shaw, where to?" Adrian was silent for 2 seconds. Then he gave an address. Not the one family house. Not the marital apartment he shared with Vivian. A long-term executive suite in North City. The car slid into the night. Outside the window, neon lights retreated one by one. Adrian unfastened the top button of his collar. His Adam's apple moved. His palm still carried the white marks left by gripping the briefcase. 7 years. It was not as if he had never given Vivian chances. 1 week before the board meeting, he had already noticed someone secretly pulling financing documents. 3 days ago, someone from legal had tentatively touched equity change templates. Last night, before entering that meeting room, he had even waited. Waited for her to give him one private explanation. Or to leave him 10 minutes afterward. But there was nothing. She sat at the main seat. Raised her hand. Signed the paper. Called him Mr. Shaw. Then it ended here. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were cold and still. "Mr. Shaw." The man in the front passenger seat turned around, his voice very low. "Of the 18 entities, 3 are still asking whether we should give One Group a buffer period. If all channels withdraw within 3 days, the movement will be huge." Adrian looked forward. His tone was calm. "Did they give me a buffer period yesterday?" The man immediately fell silent. After a few seconds, Adrian added casually, "Proceed as planned. Letters, systems, lawyer notices synchronize them. 8 o'clock sharp. Not 1 second late." "Understood. And one more thing." He tapped his knuckles lightly against his knee. "Don't touch One Group's existing business operations. Let them see for themselves where the problem really lies." "Yes." His reflection appeared in the car window. Half his face. Hard lines. No anger in his eyes. Only a clarity so calm it was almost cruel. He did not want to smash One Group apart. He only wanted to pull himself out. And see how many floors this building, which he had held up for 7 years, could still stand on its own. When the car stopped before the hotel, it was nearly 11. Adrian got out. The doorman opened the glass door for him. He went upstairs, swiped his card, and entered the suite. The lights automatically came on. A stack of documents had already been delivered to the desk. On top was the final confirmation list for the 18 investment entities. He removed his suit jacket and threw it over the back of a chair. Then he picked up the list and turned page by page. Every page was a channel he had personally paved over the years. Some were old overseas capital sources he had negotiated back. Some were long-term funds he had stolen from competitors during One Group's most difficult year. 2 of them had only kept money in One Group because he personally used assets under his own name as counter-guarantee without Vivian knowing. He had never spoken of those things. Because he believed marriage was not accounting. And affection should not be used to claim credit. But now he understood. If you stay silent for too long, others truly begin to think you did nothing. He put down the final page. Picked up the pen. Signed at the lower right corner. The stroke landed steady. Clean. This signature meant that tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, 93% of One Group's external financing channels would close at the same time. After signing, his phone rang again. An overseas number. He answered. You finally moved? A woman's voice came from the other end, lazy and amused. I thought you really planned to spend your whole life as the One family's invisible helper. Adrian pushed the documents aside and walked to the window. What did you find on Fiona Fong? Are you asking about the person, or the things in her hands? Both. The woman chuckled. She is not stable. Recently, she has been close to Felix Pei. And what she holds is not clean either. She intercepted several documents that should have landed on your desk for Vivian. If I had not been watching for you, they could have kept fooling you a little longer. Adrian's eyes cooled. He had known someone near Vivian was tampering with channels. But until today, the names had not been fully confirmed. Keep the evidence. Do not move yet. You really have patience. The woman clicked her tongue. Your wife and an outsider just joined hands to kick you out of the company, and you still want to follow order? Adrian ignored her teasing. Some things must be seen by her own eyes. No one else can see them for her. The other end went quiet for a beat, then became serious. All right. After 8 tomorrow, One Group will be very lively. Adrian Shaw. Speak. Once you take this step, there is truly no turning back. Outside, city lights spread like an ocean. His lonely reflection appeared in the glass. Adrian looked for a moment. His voice had no fluctuation. When she raised her hand last night, there was already no way back. The call ended. The room returned to silence. Adrian stood before the window for a long time. Only when his phone screen lit up with a schedule reminder did he look down. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Capital withdrawal takes effect. He glanced at it, dismissed the reminder, and turned toward the bathroom. He did not sleep long that night. When dawn came, he was already seated at the desk. The coffee had not been touched. His computer screen glowed. 18 windows lined up neatly, each corresponding to one investment entity's execution status. 7:59, 7 hours 59 minutes and 50 seconds. 7 hours 59 minutes and 55 seconds, 8 o'clock sharp. Almost simultaneously, green receipts appeared on the screen. Delivered. Received. Triggered. 18 lines. Perfectly aligned. Not one missing. Adrian leaned back in the chair. At last, a faint coldness flashed through his eyes. It was not pleasure. Not triumph. More like a blade finally falling where it was supposed to fall. At the same moment, inside One Group's president's office, Vivian had just placed her bag down. She arrived slightly later than usual. After last night's board meeting, Felix had accompanied her to meet 2 directors. At the club, they opened a bottle of champagne, saying it was an early celebration of governance structure reform. Those old foxes congratulated her on the surface, while every sentence tested how she planned to seize authority next. Vivian handled them until very late. When she returned home, it was nearly dawn. But she was not in a bad mood. At least the hardest thorn had been pulled out. She pushed open the office door and entered in heels. The secretariat was about to follow her in with reports when hurried footsteps came from outside. President 1. The door was shoved open. Fiona Fong rushed in, pale-faced, nearly hugging her tablet. Her breathing was chaotic. Something happened. Vivian frowned. She had not even taken off her coat. She scolded coldly, "Why are you panicking? Close the door." Fiona closed the door behind her. Her voice was still shaking. "This is not a small matter. Really not a small matter." At exactly 8 o'clock, the group email, legal system, and financing hotline received 18 withdrawal letters at the same time. Vivian's hand, which had been putting down her bag, paused. Withdrawal letters? She looked up. Her expression remained cold. From which one? Fiona stared at her, throat tight. Not one letter. 18. All sent at the same time. The impatience on Vivian's face froze for half a second. Then her expression cooled. "Fiona Fong, you had better know what you are saying." "I know." Fiona quickly placed the tablet on her desk and swiped rapidly. "Look for yourself. Every send time is 8 hours sharp. The copied recipients are identical. The legal teams are identical. The attachments are identical. Even the footer numbering rules are the same. Vivian lowered her head. First letter, notice of termination of cooperation. Second letter, notice of withdrawal of capital increase commitment. Third letter, notice of equity transfer execution. She scrolled down. Faster and faster. Every letter's wording looked carved from the same template. Based on risk control clauses, all subsequent financing arrangements would be terminated immediately, and existing capital exit procedures would begin. Please complete coordination within 3 days. 3 days. Vivian's eyelid jumped. She lifted her head and stared at Fiona. 18? Fiona nodded with difficulty. 18. You said 18? Her voice suddenly rose, losing control at the end. The pen on the desk was hit by her elbow, rolled off, and fell to the floor with a snap. Fiona did not dare pick it up. She only whispered, "Legal has confirmed the seals. All valid. Not pranks. Not fake letters." The office suddenly became terrifyingly quiet. Morning light shone inside. But the patch of brightness on the desk seemed cold. Vivian grabbed the tablet and pulled it close. Her fingertips pressed white against the edge. She opened the letters one by one. Looking at timestamps. Signatures. Attachment directories. The more she read, the heavier her heart became. Too neat. So neat it looked like a collective withdrawal rehearsed in advance. Fiona stood beside her and said hoarsely, "A synchronized action accurate to the second cannot be coincidence. Someone must be directing everything from behind." Vivian abruptly raised her head, hostility already impossible to suppress in her eyes. "Find out. Find out immediately who is behind this." "I already asked people to investigate," Fiona said. "But that is not the bigger problem." She opened another file. The financing ledger. Vivian took it. The moment she opened the first page, her pupils contracted. She had always known those 18 entities were important. But she had never looked at them together on one sheet. Adrian had always managed financing layout. He only gave her results. She rarely dug into the details and layered structures underneath. Now, the summary table lay before her like a knife. 18 investors. Covering 93% of one group's total external financing. Total injection amount, 21 billion yuan. The office seemed to be emptied of air. Vivian stared at that number. Her breathing paused half a beat. Impossible. She turned to the following pages violently. Short-term working capital loans. Project capital increases. Acquisition reserve credit. Overseas supply chain guarantee funds. Dense entries nearly blocked every road one group planned to walk in the next year. This was not someone making trouble. This was someone directly gripping one group's lifeline. Fiona's voice became lower. If all 18 withdraw, forget new projects. The cash flow of several existing business plates will immediately run into problems. If the banks tighten credit after that, shut up. Vivian cut her off, voice tight. She stood and strode to the floor-to-ceiling window. Then quickly turned back. The sound of her heels striking the floor became more urgent with each step. She did not believe it. She refused to believe Adrian Shaw, a consultant just kicked out of the boardroom, could overturn one group overnight. But last night, he had stood at the door and spoken so calmly. Tomorrow, there may be some changes. This was not a change. This was a market crash. She suddenly stopped, grabbed her phone, and dialed that number directly. The call rang only twice before it connected. The other side was very quiet. So quiet it felt as if he had been waiting. President 1. Adrian's voice came through the speaker. Steady. Cold. Calling me this early. Is something wrong? Vivian's fingers tightened, nearly crushing the phone. What did you do? On the other end, he paused for half a second. As if he laughed. And yet not quite. I am no longer part of the company. It would be inappropriate to ask me about one group's internal affairs, wouldn't it? Stop pretending. Vivian pressed down the tremor in her voice and stared hard out the window. 18 withdrawal letters arrived at the same time. You dare say this has nothing to do with you? Didn't you vote it through personally yesterday? Adrian's tone remained light. The board approved it unanimously. The procedure was legal and compliant. Now you are asking an outsider. President 1, what process is this? One sentence returned her coldness from last night exactly as it had been given. Vivian's chest tightened. Her throat went dry. Adrian Shaw, don't force me. Force you? He repeated the words carefully, with no detectable anger. Vivian won, when you invited me out last night, weren't you very certain? Her face went pale. Inside the office, Fiona stood aside, breathing shallowly, afraid to make a sound. Vivian gritted her teeth. What exactly do you want? You should not ask me that. Adrian said, didn't you say the company could operate without anyone? He paused. His tone remained calm, but it hurt more than any sarcasm. Without me, it can indeed operate. Without those 18 investors, try it. Those final 2 words landed like an ice blade through the phone. Vivian's fingers trembled. For a long time, she could not say anything. For the first time in a conversation with Adrian, she had completely lost the upper hand. Not because he shouted louder. Not because he used identity to crush her. Quite the opposite. He was too calm. Calm like he was watching a person whose ending had already been written still struggle pointlessly. Who exactly are you working for? Vivian's voice had changed. How could you possibly mobilize all 18 at once? Who am I working for? Adrian repeated softly, as if hearing something amusing. In these 7 years, you never once asked. That sentence made Vivian's heart sink violently. She wanted to refute him. But her throat seemed blocked. Because she suddenly realized she could not answer. She knew he understood strategy. She knew he could negotiate. She knew he always stabilized funding and projects at her most difficult moments. But how did he do it? Whom did he know? What price had he paid? She had never truly asked. She thought that was ability. Now she realized it might have been a trump card she could not bear. The other end was quiet for 2 seconds. Then Adrian dropped one sentence. Go investigate. Vivian froze. Investigate what? The ultimate beneficial owners of those 18 investors. Her heart contracted. Her hand whitened inch by inch around the phone. His voice was soft. But every word landed heavily. Vivian won, 18 entities do not mean 18 people. Behind them, there is only one. Her lips moved. No sound came out. Adrian said his final sentence. The ultimate owner's surname is Shaw. The call ended cleanly. Beep. 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 The monotone busy signal echoed inside the office, striking her temple again and again. Vivian stood where she was. Phone still raised to her ear. Her entire body seemed nailed in place. Surname Shaw. Adrian Shaw. Those names collided inside her mind with a boom. On the desk lay the financing ledger. 93%. 21 billion yuan. 18 entities withdrawing in sync. Yesterday, in the boardroom, her line, if he's gone, now struck back across her own face like a slap. The person she kicked away yesterday might never have been a consultant at all. He was the lifeline when group could least afford to lose. Fiona stepped forward carefully. President 1, what do we do now? Vivian did not answer immediately. She lowered the phone. Her eyes fell onto the financing ledger. The forced calm in her eyes finally cracked. The crack widened. Wide enough that even she began to doubt how much of One Group's glory over the years had truly belonged to her. Then Fiona moved first. She almost threw herself toward the desk, opening newly arrived emails one after another. Her face became paler with every click. President 1. Her voice tightened. Formal execution notices have arrived. Vivian lifted her eyes sharply. Fiona turned the tablet toward her. Rows of email subjects lined the screen neatly. Capital withdrawal execution notice. Credit support termination notice. Capital exit procedure activation letter. Uniform titles. Uniform signatures. Uniform attachments. Even the law firm's seal positions looked measured by a ruler. The top line was cold and left no room for negotiation. Effective immediately, 18 investment entities will simultaneously begin exit procedures, terminating all hidden capital injection arrangements. Total scale, 21 billion yuan. Not a warning. Not pressure. Liquidation. Vivian grabbed the tablet and scrolled down quickly. With every page, her breathing sank. She tried to find one line saying, negotiable. One line saying, communication reserved. Even one line suggesting, separate meeting advised. There was none. All execution clauses. All effective times. All lawyer seals. Fiona spread printed paper copies across the desk one by one. White paper. Black characters. Dense lines. Like someone had written one group's obituary in advance. This is not a tantrum, she whispered. This is formal liquidation. Vivian did not answer. She picked up her phone and called the first number. It rang for more than 10 seconds before connecting. President 1. The person on the other end was a core investor representative. His tone was polite, as if reading a notice. Vivian pressed down the fire in her throat. I need an explanation. The relevant letter has been sent to your company mailbox. Everything is executed according to contract. I'm asking who instructed this. The other side paused for 1 second. We do not accept negotiation. We do not accept explanation. Execution according to agreement. Vivian's face went cold. You have worked with one group for so many years. Now you want to withdraw with one sentence. President 1, we are only following instructions from the ultimate beneficial owner. I want to see you. I apologize. My schedule is full today. The call ended. The busy tone hurt her eardrums. Vivian gripped the phone and called the second number. The third. The fourth. Every response was identical. According to contract. No negotiation. Please have legal coordinate directly. The procedure has started. It is irreversible. By the end, even her eyes began to empty. She was the president of one group. Usually, these people smiled and called her President 1. If they replied 1 minute late, they apologized. But now, everyone had suddenly unified their attitude. They did not even bother perfunctory politeness. She was not being targeted. She was being bypassed. That realization stuck in her throat like a dull knife. No blood. But suffocation. The office phone rang again. Fiona glanced at the caller display. Her face grew worse. Finance. Vivian answered. The other end spoke rapidly, with noise in the background. President 1, 6 banks just sent notices at the same time, requesting early repayment. What early repayment? 6 corporate loans, totaling 7.8 billion yuan. Because the guarantor withdrew, early repayment clauses have been triggered. They require full repayment within 3 days. Vivian's temple jumped. Which guarantor? The other side went quiet for half a second before whispering. Related credit enhancement arrangements under Adrian Shaw's name have all been withdrawn. Snap. The pen in Vivian's hand broke in two. Ink splashed onto the documents, spreading into an ugly black stain. Connect me to the bank relationship manager. The call switched. A woman's voice came through, steady to the point of having no fluctuation. Hello, President 1. According to the supplementary guarantee agreement signed between your company and our bank, due to guarantor withdrawal, repayment is advanced under contract. I can add other guarantees. Give me time. I apologize. The process has already begun. I will provide a plan today. President 1, the key point of our notice is only this sentence. The woman's voice remained polite. Guarantee withdrawn. Repayment advanced according to contract. Then she hung up cleanly. The office was left with nothing but breathing. Fiona's lips were a little pale. She still held the newly printed cash report. Available cash on the books cannot even cover today's gap. Vivian turned toward her. What did you say? Available cash, after wages, taxes, supply chain daily settlements, and guarantee supplements for 2 ongoing projects. Fiona's voice became weaker. It does not cover even half. If all 6 banks press together, the capital pool will bottom out this afternoon. Vivian stared at the report. As if seeing her own company's accounts for the first time. She had always thought the problem was only a financing shortage. Delay a little. Talk a little. There would always be a way to rotate cash. Only now did she realize that what had been pulled away was not money. It was the skeleton. Financing. Loans. Credit lines. Guarantees. Payment terms. All were strung along the same line. And that line was in Adrian Shaw's hand. The internal phone rang again like mad. Fiona answered and listened for 2 sentences. Her face changed completely. Supply chain center. Speak. 6 upstream core suppliers have all sent letters terminating payment term cooperation. From today onward, cash on delivery. Unsettled payments require priority liquidation. Her throat tightened. The reason is also the same, original personal asset guarantee withdrawn. Risk rating raised. Vivian felt a roar in her ears. As if something had collapsed. Once payment terms broke, when Group would not even have time to breathe. She abruptly stood. Her heel scraped against the floor with a sharp sound. Notify all board-related executives. Everyone to the meeting room. Now. Fiona nodded immediately and turned to leave. At the door, she stopped. What about Felix Pay? Vivian's movement paused. Contact him. She gritted her teeth, every word squeezed out. Tell him to come too. When the meeting room door opened, chaos filled the room. The same long table as yesterday. The same people. But yesterday, they had raised their hands in perfect order. Today, they flipped through files in panic. Some were on the phone. Some were digging through contracts. Some had sweat covering their foreheads and could not even sit still. Vivian walked to the main seat. The moment she sat, a senior board executive slapped a new letter onto the table. Watching Group just sent this. Vivian looked down. Her pupils contracted. Notice of cancellation of all order cooperation. An annual general contract project worth over 10 billion yuan was terminated directly. She turned to the next page. Her fingers tightened violently. Termination basis, final project guarantor exited. Core performance protection failed. Automatic termination clause triggered. The final guarantor column was clearly written, Adrian Shaw. The meeting room exploded. Why is Adrian Shaw written into Huacheng's final guarantee clause? Didn't you say he was just a consultant? Who reviewed such a huge contract? Didn't Felix Pay say he had taken over the financing structure? Where is he? Why isn't he here? Each sentence struck the table like a hammer. Vivian lifted her head. Her face had become extremely ugly. All of you shut up. First solve the funding gap. No chaos. How do we solve it? Someone panicked directly. Banks withdrawing loans, investors withdrawing capital, suppliers cutting payment terms, Huacheng canceling the contract. What are we supposed to use to fill the gap? Yesterday, weren't we saying a consultant leaving had no impact? The moment that line came out, the meeting room fell silent for 1 second. That second was more embarrassing than noise. Because everyone remembered. Yesterday, in this very place, at this very table, they had raised their hands one by one. As if clearing redundancy. As if cutting away a burden. As if making room for a more efficient future for one group. And only one night later, this building began cracking from its foundation. Vivian's fingertips went numb. Her palms were covered in cold sweat. She wanted to refute them. Wanted to say things had not reached the worst point. But the letters were laid before them one after another. Even arguing looked ridiculous. The door opened again. The CFO hurried in holding a thick stack of financial working papers. His forehead was full of sweat. The rating report is out. No one spoke. He connected the file to the projection screen. The screen lit up. The room seemed frozen by cold light. When Group's credit rating had been urgently downgraded from AA to C. The line below was even more glaring. All outstanding bonds have triggered cross-default clauses. At the end of the long table, someone sucked in a breath. A cup was knocked over. How can it be so fast? Is the rating agency crazy? Once cross-default triggers, all bonds, they all die. The CFO's voice trembled as he finished the sentence. The meeting room fell silent again. The CFO opened his working papers. His hands were shaking, but every word was clear. I just led the team to reverse-check the past 7 years of financing, credit, acquisitions, and supply chain guarantees. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Every page represented a different project. Different years. Different counterparties. But the final anchor point was shockingly identical. West City Warehouse acquisition. Underlying funds came from related SPV credit enhancement. Southern raw material chain switch. Performance guarantee was backed by personal asset guarantee. Overseas OEM divestment. Bridge financing was covered by hidden capital injection. Huacheng project. Final guarantor signer, Adrian Shaw. 6 rescue rounds. 18 investment entities. Ultimate beneficial owner after penetration, the same. The CFO lifted his head. His face was pale as paper. But his voice nailed everyone to their chairs. These 7 years, nearly every financing round, every rescue fund, and every core project guarantee of one group came from hidden capital injections controlled by Adrian Shaw. Behind the 18 investors, there were not 18 people. There was one ultimate owner. No one answered. The air seemed dead. The CFO swallowed. Finally, he spoke the last sentence. He was not a strategic consultant. He was the true full controlling backer of one group. When that sentence landed, the room became completely silent. Yesterday's vote was like a boomerang. Only now did it truly smash back onto everyone's head. No one dared talk about governance optimization anymore. No one dared mention cutting redundant roles. What they had voted away was not a seat. It was the foundation of the entire building. Vivian sat at the main seat. Her back collapsed inch by inch. She wanted to brace herself against the table. But she had no strength in her hands. Her entire body felt hollowed out. She had always thought she held one group. Always thought the achievements, the turnarounds, the visible glory everyone could see had been won by her step by step. Now she finally understood. The ground she stood on had always been padded by Adrian. And when she pushed him out the door with her own hands, she had pushed away one group's last dignity too. At both sides of the long table, board executives lowered their heads. No one spoke now. Yesterday's easy alignment had become today's scorching evidence. Some wanted to explain. They opened their mouths, then swallowed the words back. Because no explanation could cover the pile of financial working papers before them. Vivian stared at the projection screen. For the first time, genuine panic appeared in her eyes. Then her gaze slowly moved to an empty seat. The place Felix usually liked to sit. Today, he was not there. She stared for a few seconds. Then, as if grabbing the final rope, she suddenly spoke. Keep contacting Felix Pay. None of the board leaves. And pull out every project and contract he took over. No one moved. Vivian lifted her head. Her voice was hoarse, but sharper than before. I said now. This time, someone finally rushed out. But no one in the room believed this was a turning point. Everyone could hear it. That was not the command of someone in control. It was a person driven to desperation, beginning to grasp at any medicine. Where is Felix Pay? Vivian nearly threw that sentence out. No one dared answer. On the projection screen, the red words downgrading the rating to C still burned like a slap across every face. Just then, the door opened. Felix finally arrived. His suit was still neat when he entered. Only there was sweat at his temple. Clearly, he had run all the way. The moment he stepped in, he saw everyone in the room staring at him. His footsteps paused. Vivian had already stood. She was unsteady, one hand braced against the table. Her face was cold white. Her voice stretched like a wire about to snap. Come here. Felix forced a smile. President 1, I've heard about the situation. Don't panic first. I told you to come here. That shout startled even the board executives nearby. Felix had no choice but to walk before the main seat. Vivian grabbed his arm. Her fingers dug in so hard they turned white. She no longer cared about her last bit of dignity. You said you could bring in new investors. You said Adrian Shaw leaving didn't matter. You had connections. You had replacement financing plans. Go handle it now. Felix frowned from the pain. At first, he still tried to maintain that gentle appearance and lowered his voice to soothe her. Vivian, calm down first. The whole board is here. This matter can still be discussed. Vivian stared at him. 6 banks are withdrawing loans. 18 capital sources are withdrawing. Suppliers are cutting payment terms. Huacheng cancelled the contract. Tell me how to discuss it. Didn't you say you could carry it? Didn't you say you understood capital better than Adrian Shaw? Felix's smile began to fail. On both sides of the long table, people who had been lowering their heads to flip documents lifted their eyes one by one. They heard something wrong. Last night, the most spirited person in the boardroom had been Felix. He submitted the proposal. He proposed strategic handover. He also guaranteed future resource integration. Now Vivian was dragging those promises out one by one, putting him on fire. Felix lowered his voice. Don't grab me like this. It looks ugly. Vivian acted as if she had not heard. Her grip tightened even more. You promised me. As long as we asked Adrian Shaw out, you could make up for one group's strategy, financing, and capital structure. You said it yourself. Now call your people. Call what people? Felix finally became annoyed and flung his arm hard. With a snap, Vivian stumbled half a step. Her palm hit the corner of the table. documents scattered across the floor. The whole room went dead silent. Felix straightened his cuff. His eyes had completely changed. No trace remained of his usual attentive obedience. Only naked impatience remained. The company is already like this. Why would I help you? One sentence pierced the final layer of paper. Vivian lifted her head sharply. The board executives all looked at him, their gazes suddenly unfriendly. Felix simply stopped pretending. He sneered. What I talked about before was normal takeover. Who could have expected Adrian Shaw to keep such a hand? 21 billion yuan withdrawn just like that, and even the guarantees are in his hands. Yesterday, when all of you voted, weren't you very happy? Now that something happened, all of you are staring at me. Felix pay. Someone slammed the table. What do you mean? My meaning isn't clear enough? Felix tugged his tie, his tone becoming more aggressive. I only made suggestions. The final decision was President Wen's. The voters were you. Now that something happened, why should it all fall on my head? Vivian looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. The man who whispered beside her yesterday, "The company is ours now," was now standing before everyone, and his first instinct was to clear himself. Her lips moved. Her voice was hoarse. You lied to me? Felix finally tore off the refined mask himself. Lied to you? He laughed softly, not loudly, but his voice drilled precisely into every ear in the room. Vivian 1, you are in your 30s. Who is sincere to you, and who is using you as a stepping stone don't you know in your own heart? Vivian's face went completely white. She braced herself against the table and stood straight. Scattered papers were under her feet. Her heel crushed one sheet with a sound that made the teeth ache. She looked at Felix. Her lips moved twice. But she could not say a single word. Yesterday, when she raised her hand at this table, Felix had stood at her right. Gentle. Considerate. Even the proposal wording had been polished by him 3 times. He had said, Vivian, when group needs a cleaner governance structure. With Adrian Shaw here, you will never be able to fully expand. She believed him. She thought she could finally personally pluck the fruit that had hung for 7 years. She thought Felix was the person who truly understood her and was willing to share her burdens. Now the sentence echoing in the whole meeting room was, the company is already like this. Why would I help you? What a beautiful ending. Vivian clenched her fists. Her nails dug into her palms until they went numb. But she did not cry. The red around her eyes was forced back. Her voice became colder than before. Felix pay. In your first week at One Group, you contacted the confidential archives room of the legal department. You reviewed financing contract archive records. You also asked about Adrian Shaw's seal authority. Do not think no one can find out what you have been doing outside behind my back. A flash of panic crossed Felix's face, but he covered it with a cold laugh. Then investigate. Can you still investigate? Without Adrian Shaw here, how much real authority do you think remains in your hands? That sentence stabbed into the hearts of everyone present. The foundation of One Group's 7 years had been padded by Adrian alone. Yesterday, they personally pulled that foundation out. Now the whole building swayed like paper. No one was qualified to blame anyone else. But Felix turning his face this fast still chilled everyone. In your first week at the company, you accessed the legal archive room. A low voice suddenly came from the corner. It was the eldest member of the board, Director Zhou, who rarely spoke. But when he did, he struck pressure points. You reviewed financing contract archive records and asked about Adrian Shaw's seal authority. The legal director mentioned it to me once. Felix's face finally changed. Director Zhou, what do you mean? My meaning is simple. Director Zhou placed down his teacup and lifted his head. His eyes were so seasoned they made one's back go cold. You did not come to help One Group reform. You came to hollow it out. The meeting room was silent for 1 second. Then it exploded like a barrel of gunpowder. Director Zhou, do you have evidence? Felix Pei pushed the vote yesterday. Today he disappeared for an hour. Now he says something like this. Something is wrong. Should legal immediately begin an audit? What audit? Every project he touched was under Adrian Shaw's guarantee. Once the guarantee withdrew, all those contracts collapsed. Sentences smashed onto Felix like hail. He stepped back half a pace. The sweat at his temple could no longer be hidden. Vivian stood beside the main seat and watched him go from composed, to panicked, to exposed. The last bit of warmth in her eyes went out. She did not scream again. Did not question him again. She only pulled out the chair and sat down. Her voice was flat like still water. "Fiona Fong." "Here." Fiona answered from near the door. "Seal every archive list Felix Pei reviewed, every handover record, every communication thread. From today onward, freeze all his permissions. Force transfer all projects. Finance department, freeze all his travel reimbursements and advances until the audit is complete." "You," Felix whipped around. "Vivian 1, you have no right to do this." "I have no right?" Vivian lifted her eyes and looked at him. For the first time, her gaze carried no temperature. "I am president of one group. The board remains in session. You are only deputy director of strategic expansion. Who has no right?" Felix's lips turned blue. But in front of more than a dozen board executives, he could not refute a single word. Director Zhou slowly stood. He looked at Felix, then at Vivian. His voice was not loud, but it covered the noise in the room. "The most important matter now is not holding one deputy director accountable. It is how to fill the 21 billion yuan hole outside." The meeting room went quiet again. Everyone instinctively looked at Vivian. She sat straight at the main seat. Her coat had been taken off. Her shirt cuffs were rolled to her forearms. A tablet and phone lay open beside her. Her whole body seemed stretched to its limit. But she did not shake. Did not throw anything. Did not say another useless word. "The 18 investors." She spoke. Her voice was hoarse, but every word was clear. "Contact them one by one. Confirm whether there is any remaining communication channel. I will meet the 6 banks tomorrow morning. Supply chain center will activate the emergency backup plan. Prioritize daily production. Suspend all other projects temporarily. Do not sign Huacheng's termination letter for now. Send people to Huacheng headquarters for face-to-face communication." After saying that, she paused. Her gaze swept slowly across the whole table. "If any of you want to leave now, I will not stop you. But if there is still one person willing to stay and finish what must be done, then stop sitting there reopening old accounts. Reopening old accounts will not fill the hole." Silence lasted about 5 seconds. Then Director Zhou sat down first. Second. Third. One board executive after another sat back down. Some started making calls. Some opened laptops and rebuilt tables. No one said "leave" again. No one looked back toward the door. Vivian did not relax. And she did not dare relax. Only after everyone lowered their heads and returned to work did she quietly pick up her phone from the table. The final call in her call history was still the conversation with Adrian that morning, less than 3 minutes long. She stared at that name for 2 seconds. Her thumb hovered over the dial button. But she never pressed it. She knew she should call. She also knew calling would be useless. For 7 years, Adrian had blocked countless storms for her. Every time she looked down to find him, he was there. Every time she said nothing, he took the matter over anyway. But this time was different. She had pushed him out herself. In front of everyone. Smiling as she said, "If he's gone, he's gone." She withdrew her hand and placed the phone face down on the desk. "Fiona. Here. Organize every project working paper and guarantee document signed or sealed by Adrian Shaw. 1 copy to legal. 1 to finance. 1 to Director Zhou." Fiona froze. "You want to see how many things can still be saved." Vivian lowered her head and opened the next file. Her pen tip rested on the paper. Her hand was still shaking. But her voice had steadied. "Not every clause he left behind necessarily closes the door. Some may still leave room for negotiation." The meeting room began moving again. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. Footsteps rushed outside. Like a machine about to fall apart being forcibly screwed back together. But Vivian, sitting at the main seat, understood more clearly than anyone. How long this machine could still turn was not in her hands. It was in Adrian Shaw's hands. And before she dialed the next number, she owed him one truth. And one true bow of the head. But those words she still could not say. Because saying them meant admitting that for 7 years, she had never truly understood her own husband. North City Executive Suite. The curtains were half drawn. A narrow strip of morning light fell across the coffee table, landing on the latest printed updates. Adrian sat on the sofa. 2 buttons of his shirt were undone. A pen spun between his fingers. Before him lay two reports. One was One Group's emergency cash report from 9 that morning. The other was a penetration report on all of Felix Pay's external communications and fund flows over the past 12 months. Across from him sat a young man in thin framed glasses and a black hoodie. Two laptops sat beside him. He was Daniel Shen, data analysis lead on Adrian's private team. One Group's side, Daniel said, contacted all 6 banks and was rejected by all. 3 suppliers are still watching, but payment terms are definitely gone. Huacheng's headquarters blocked Vivian's people in the lobby and did not even let them into the elevator. Adrian did not lift his head. What about Felix? The board froze his permissions on the spot, and legal began an internal audit this afternoon. Daniel pushed up his glasses. But he moved fast. Late last night, he transferred out a sum of money. Not small. Through a personal account. We caught the flow. Adrian finally lifted his eyes. How much? 17 million yuan. Where is it? Overseas account. Still moving. We can recover it if we pursue. But the line behind it is interesting. The money Felix transferred came from a One Group budget item called strategic consulting fees. Approver, Vivian Wen herself. Seal date, 3 months ago. Adrian's pen stopped. He looked down at the penetration report. His fingertip landed on Felix's money flow and approval chain. The transaction approved by Vivian was clearly listed. Remark column, annual consulting service prepayment. 3 months ago. At that time, Felix had been at One Group for less than 9 months. Deputy Director of Strategic Expansion. Not high authority. To bypass finance review and make Vivian personally approve 17 million yuan, only 2 possibilities existed. Either Vivian trusted him extremely, or the money had not gone through a normal budget path at all. Adrian closed his eyes. He had wanted to wait for Vivian to discover Felix's problem herself. But now it seemed what she could discover might only be the layer Felix wanted her to see. Do not touch that line. He put down the pen, voice flat. Watch closely. See who receives it. Yes. Daniel was about to close his laptop, then stopped. There is one more thing. He lifted his head and looked at Adrian hesitantly. Vivian Wen's secretary, Fiona Fong, contacted a private number this morning. We traced the source. It is an old communication channel used by Shaw Holdings years ago. Adrian's brow moved. She called it? No. Dialed for less than 3 seconds and hung up. Daniel said, but that number was the channel your father once left for your mother. Not many people know it. Vivian Wen could not have it. If Fiona Fong can get it, that means at least half a year ago, someone around you was passing things out. The room was quiet for several seconds. Adrian looked out the window. His fingers tapped lightly against his knee. Downstairs, traffic and crowds moved as usual. Everyone lived their own life. No one knew what kind of liquidation was happening inside this building. Have you turned over Fiona Fong's background? Yes. Clean on the surface. Top university graduate. Joined One Group 5 years ago, 1 year earlier than Vivian took over. Worked her way up to president's secretary. No obvious problem. Daniel paused. But one thing. In the recommendation field from the year she joined, the name listed was Vivian Wen's mother. Adrian finally turned his head. Vivian's mother had died 3 years ago. Yet Fiona's employment recommendation letter listed a dead woman's name and still passed review. Either HR had been useless. Or someone had opened a special channel for her. Keep digging, Adrian said. Do not alert her. Understood. After Daniel left, the room became quiet again. Adrian stood by the window and glanced at his phone. Several unread messages. 2 came from an account marked Aunt Chen. He opened them. Only a few short lines and 1 photo. In the photo, a middle-aged woman sat in a private room of a tea house. Across from her was Felix Pay. The room number was captured clearly. On the table lay a document. The cover was blurred, but the words, One Group, at the upper left were faintly visible. Adrian looked for 2 seconds. He zoomed in to carefully identify the cover details, then slowly turned off the screen. He did not reply. Nor did he forward the photo to anyone. He only walked back to the coffee table, picked up One Group's emergency cash report, and turned to the last page. At the footer was a tiny note left by his people last night. One Group headquarters, B2 archives room. 1 week ago, All original credit enhancement contracts from 2019 to 2021 were retrieved. Signature of retrieving person, Felix Pay. 1 week ago. At that time, Felix had still been smiling at everyone in the meeting, saying, "The company does not operate on sentiment." Adrian tore off the note, folded it, placed it inside a drawer, and locked it. Then he picked up his coat and walked toward the door. The driver was already waiting downstairs. He needed to personally go somewhere. And meet someone. Someone he had not seen in 3 years. Someone it was time to meet. The car passed through old streets in North City, circled 2 overpasses, and finally stopped before a gray-white small building. The surroundings were old residential neighborhoods. The buildings were not high. Half-dead vines crawled across the walls. There was no sign at the entrance, only a palm-sized bronze plaque embedded beside the iron gate, Jessen Consulting. Adrian got out and rang the bell. After about 10 seconds, the iron door opened. A middle-aged woman in a gray cardigan stood inside. Her hair was casually pinned up. No makeup on her face. But her eyes were sharp like knives. 3 years. She leaned against the doorframe and looked at him, neither warm nor cold. "I thought you planned to spend your whole life as an invisible man in the one family." Adrian stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Aunt Claire, I need something." The woman clicked her tongue and turned inward. Her steps were neither fast nor slow. Her back was thin but straight. Adrian followed her down a corridor and into a small office on the 2nd floor. The desk was piled with documents and file bags. In the corner sat an old fax machine. On the wall hung yellowed business newspaper clippings. Aunt Claire sat back in her office chair, took a cigarette from the drawer, lit it, and let the smoke rise slowly before glancing at him. "Before your mother died, she left this system with me. You did not come once in 3 years. Now you appear and ask for help. Speak. What matter is worth you coming personally?" Adrian sat opposite her, took out his phone, opened the photo, and pushed it to her. Aunt Claire glanced down but did not speak immediately. She put out the cigarette in the ashtray, picked up the phone, enlarged the edges of the photo, and stared at the blurred words on the document cover for a long time. Then she put down the phone. "When group project working paper." "Who took the photo?" "Fiona Fong." "She sent it to you?" "No, my people intercepted it through another channel. But Fiona has access permission to One Group's archives room, and her retrieval records this year have been erased." Aunt Claire was silent for several seconds. Then she suddenly laughed. Coldly. "Do you know your mother's last sentence before she died?" Adrian did not answer. She said, "Yenzhou is too stubborn. The person he chooses, he will trust to the end. But business is not a temple. People's hearts change." Aunt Claire leaned back in her chair, her voice flat like reading an old letter. "The year you married Vivian Wan, she did not stop you. But she asked me to keep this system. At the time, she said you would use it someday. 3 years passed. I thought she had been wrong. And now, you still came." Adrian sat very straight. His gaze did not evade. "I did not come to hear you lecture me. I know." Aunt Claire pulled a thick craft paper envelope from the drawer and placed it on the table, pressing one finger against its edge. "Inside are some things Vivian Wen's mother entrusted someone to pass over while she was alive. Your mother and her mother were old acquaintances. I never opened the specific contents. But the target is very clear. Some of One Group's equity structure and hidden nominee holdings over the past 30 years were never surnamed One." Adrian stared at the envelope. His brows finally tightened slowly. "If not One, then whose surname?" Aunt Claire pushed the ashtray farther away, lowering her voice by a degree. "Shaw." Adrian's fingers paused on his knee. "Not your Shaw. Your father's side." Aunt Claire said, "The year your father and mother divorced, your mother held a portion of old Shaw Holdings shares. She did not use them at the time. Later, Vivian Wen's mother somehow obtained nominee rights and held them in her hands. Vivian may not even know this asset exists." The office was silent for a moment. A pigeon fluttered past outside the window, casting a shadow across the desk. Adrian slowly reached out, picked up the envelope, opened the seal, and pulled out the top yellowed photocopy. It was a share nominee agreement. Signing date, 21 years ago. Party A, Sean Shaw. His father. Party B, Sylvia Sunday Vivian Wen's mother. Nominee asset, Early Shaw Holdings allocated shares, 6.3% of total share capital at the time. Your mother did not fight for those shares back then, Aunt Claire said as he turned the pages. She said this was something your father owed her, but she did not want to drag her child into it. After Sylvia's son received the nominee rights, what she did with them, no one knows. But with her methods back then, she would not have simply let them sit. Adrian turned to the final page. Under the nominee clause was a handwritten supplement. It was Sylvia's son's handwriting. Light, but every word clear. All voting rights and disposal rights arising from shares held under this agreement belong to the nominee holder. Unless the nominee holder gives written consent, the original holder and related parties may not assert rights or interfere with disposal in any form. Translated simply, for 21 years, Sylvia's son had absolute disposal power over that 6.3%. If Vivian inherited it, the equity Vivian held might be more than she thought. And the extra portion belonged, at the root, to the Shaw family. Adrian returned the documents to the envelope and sealed it. Does Vivian know? No, Aunt Claire shook her head. Sylvia's son died suddenly. Many things were not delivered. After Vivian took over Wen Group, most of her mother's old documents were sealed in the Wen family's old house. I am not sure whether anyone has touched them. But you had better go look. Adrian nodded. He stood and tucked the envelope under his arm. At the door, Aunt Claire suddenly called, Yenjo. He looked back. Aunt Claire's gaze was softer than before, but also more complicated. Your mother let go back then because she believed you would have your own life. You chose Vivian Wen. She never said a word against it. But if you ask my opinion today, she paused. Do not treat Vivian as an enemy. Treat her as an opponent. Take back what should be taken back. Do not soften because of old feelings. What her mother owed the Shaw family is not the same as the 7 years between you and her. Adrian stood at the door. Backlit, his figure paused for 2 seconds. Then he nodded very lightly. I know. He pushed open the door and left. The door closed behind him. Aunt Claire sat inside the office and lit another cigarette. Smoke rose slowly, hiding the indistinct expression on her face. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before connecting. He came. Aunt Claire said into the phone. He took it. The other end was silent for several seconds. Then came a very soft the call ended. Aunt Claire put down the phone, snuffed out the cigarette, and opened the window for air. Outside, Old Street sycamore leaves lay scattered on the ground. The wind swept past. The rustling sounded exactly like that autumn 21 years ago. Back then, Sylvia's son had sat in this very office and pushed the nominee agreement toward her. She smiled and said something Aunt Claire remembered to this day. Claire, keep a bottom line for Yenjo for me. He will understand someday. At the time, Aunt Claire did not understand. Now, she understood a little. The nominee agreement Sylvia's son left behind had never been for herself. It was for a day when, between Vivian Wen and Adrian Shaw, one of them had to get the knife first. Now, the knife was in Adrian's hand. Adrian did not return to the hotel. Sitting in the car, he read the envelope's documents from beginning to end again. Then he asked the driver to turn around and go to the Wen family's old house in West City. He had visited that house once, the year they married. After that, Vivian said the old house had been vacant too long and never arranged for anyone to live there again. Back then, he had not thought much. He assumed Vivian disliked recalling the time after her mother died and avoided the place. But now, looking at the nominee agreement in his hand, many things suddenly made sense. Vivian was not avoiding memories. She simply did not know what was still locked inside the old house. When the car stopped outside the iron gate, it was nearly noon. Gray brick walls. Black iron gate. The lock was an old mechanical one. Not smart access. Adrian got out and looked. From his pocket, he took a key ring. The year he and Vivian married, Vivian had casually given him a spare key to the old house, saying it might someday be useful. He had never used it once. He inserted it and turned. It jammed. He turned again. Still jammed. He pulled the key out and examined it. Tried the keyhole again. Still would not turn. It was not the wrong key. The lock cylinder had been changed. Adrian crouched and inspected the area around the keyhole. The brass surface had several extremely shallow new marks, as if someone had opened the door with tools recently. then changed the cylinder afterward. He stood and called a number. Daniel. Here. The lock cylinder at the one family old house was changed. Find out who changed it in the past 3 months, and whether there is any record. Received. He hung up. He did not rush away. Standing before the iron gate, he looked into the courtyard through the bars. The old locust tree was still there. Its leaves were half yellow. They had fallen all over the ground. No one swept them. Under the corridor sat an old rattan chair. Beside it was a blue and white porcelain basin. The soil inside was dried and cracked. This place had clearly been vacant for at least 2 years. But if no one lived here for so long, who would deliberately change the lock of an unused house? Unless something inside was not meant to be touched. Adrian stood at the gate for about 3 more minutes. Then turned back to the car. Back to the hotel. The car started again and passed through the old streets of West City. Sitting in the back seat, Adrian leaned against the chair and closed his eyes. He connected every clue in his mind. Sylvia Sun had held 6.3% of Old Shaw Holdings shares as nominee 21 years ago. Whether those shares had appreciated or been used elsewhere was unknown. But Shaw Holdings' scale 21 years ago meant that 6.3% was now worth at least several billion yuan. That asset had been under the nominee holder's disposal rights for 21 years. If Vivian did not know, then when she inherited Wen Group, she might only have inherited the visible Wen family assets. The whereabouts of the hidden nominee shares might not be under her control. But the question was, if she did not know, who changed the lock now? Who was guarding the secret her mother left behind? The answer surfaced like cold water against his spine. Fiona Fong. The secretary who had entered Wen Group a year before Vivian, whose recommender was listed as Sylvia Sunday. She had keys to the old house. Access to the archives room. And her retrieval records over the past year had been erased. Fiona was not Vivian's person. At least, not entirely. She was the final nail Sylvia Sun had left behind. The sky outside began leaning west. Adrian's phone vibrated. Daniel's message popped up, lock change record found. 3 months ago, when old house gate cylinder replaced. Contractor, small locksmith company in West City. Commissioning signer, Fiona Fong. As expected. Adrian read it and did not reply. He only turned off the screen and returned the phone to his pocket. Then he said to the driver, "Stop at the next intersection." The car slowly pulled over. Adrian got out, entered a roadside convenience store, and bought a bottle of water. He stood before the store, twisted open the cap, and drank a mouthful. His gaze landed on a gray office building across the road. On the 4th floor hung an unimpressive sign, Mingyuan Capital. Mingyuan Capital. Among Wen Group's 18 investment entities, it was the only channel that had not publicly issued a formal withdrawal letter. Not because it did not want to withdraw, but because it was Adrian's own registered company. The source of the entire financing chain was here. All 18 investors were managed and funded through Mingyuan Capital at the bottom layer. The financial working papers Vivian had flipped through in the boardroom that day, if penetrated to the deepest layer, led to the 4th floor of this plain gray building. Adrian tightened the bottle cap, tossed it into the trash, and returned to the car. Back to the hotel. The car merged into traffic again. Sitting in the back seat, he opened one unread message. It came from a number labeled Director Zhou. Only one line, Fiona Fong took a half-day leave this afternoon. Said she was unwell. Adrian read it for 2 seconds and replied, follow. After sending it, he put the phone back into his pocket and leaned against the seat, closing his eyes. He knew what would happen next. Fiona's leave was not to see a doctor. She would go to the one old house. She would confirm whether the documents she had locked away 3 months ago were still safe. As long as she went there, Adrian could confirm 2 things. First, whether the nominee agreement Sylvia Sun left behind had been altered while alive. Second, whom Fiona was truly guarding that door for. If she was only guarding it for Vivian, no one would move at the old house this afternoon. If there was someone else behind her, then this trip to the old house would be the start of catching them all. At 4:20 p.m., across from the one old house, a dark gray business van parked beneath the trees. The windows were tinted. Nothing could be seen from outside. 3 people sat inside. Daniel sat in the passenger seat holding a tablet. On the screen were real-time surveillance feeds from the front and rear gates. She's here, Daniel said softly. On the screen, a white sedan stopped at the iron gate. Fiona Fong got out from the driver's seat, wearing a light gray trench coat and holding a handbag. She did not hesitate. She walked to the gate, took out a key, inserted it into the lock, and turned. The door opened. Daniel zoomed in. After entering, she gently pulled the iron gate closed behind her. But she did not lock it. She did not lock the gate, Adrian said. He sat in the back, lowering the window just a crack, watching the gate close slowly in the evening light. He said nothing more. Only silently counted the time. Fiona entering the old house would take 15 minutes at fastest, 40 at slowest. If she only checked whether the files were intact, she would not stay long. But if she was waiting for someone, that was another matter. Time passed second by second. At the 18th minute, the white car did not move. The iron gate did not open. At the 30th minute, still nothing. Adrian took out his phone and sent Director Zhou a message. "Where is Vivian this afternoon?" The reply came quickly, "Office. Felix Pei's audit materials are being organized. She has not left." Then Fiona's illness was a lie only she knew. Vivian did not know her secretary had gone to the old house. Nor did she know what was locked there. At the 42nd minute, the iron gate opened from inside. Fiona walked out. In her hand was now a black document bag. She did not put it in the car. She held it directly, turned back to lock the gate, then quickly walked toward the driver's seat. Daniel looked back at Adrian. "Follow? Follow," Adrian said. "Not too close. See where she goes." The gray business van started slowly and trailed the white sedan across two intersections. Fiona did not drive fast. She even circled two streets, as if confirming whether anyone was following. But her counter-surveillance was crude. Both turns reversed at the same intersection. Clearly improvised, not professionally trained. "She is going to meet someone," Daniel whispered. Adrian did not refute it. He had seen it too. 15 minutes later, the white sedan stopped before a tea house. Fiona got out and hurried inside with the document bag. "Stop farther away." Daniel parked the car across from a small convenience store, then turned off the engine. Adrian got out, zipped his jacket up to the top, lowered his cap, crossed the road, and entered the tea house. The lobby was quiet. Only a waiter stood behind the counter playing on his phone. Adrian glanced around. He did not see Fiona. But at the second-floor corner, the door of one private room was half open. Light seeped through the gap. He went upstairs, steps extremely light. When he reached the door, he heard a man's voice inside. It carried a smile, but it did not sound pleasant. "You moved faster than I expected." Fiona's voice was low and tense. "I took the things out. But I didn't have time to fully check the old house. I only brought the most critical files. Don't touch the rest yet. Wait until I arrange time, don't rush." The man interrupted. "Let me see what you brought first." Inside came the rustle of pages turning. Adrian stood outside the door, leaning against the wall, breathing as lightly as possible. After several pages, the man suddenly laughed. His voice carried the certainty of someone who understood everything. "Sylvia Sun really did leave a backhand. If this nominee agreement is exposed, Vivian Wen's equity structure must be recalculated." "But," he paused. "Are you sure Adrian Shaw doesn't know about this?" Fiona was silent for several seconds. Then she said, "He went to Justin Consulting this morning." Inside the room, everything suddenly went quiet. The man's voice cooled. "He met Claire Chen?" "Yes." "How much does he know?" "I'm not sure." Fiona said, "But Claire Chen has backups. If he went there, at least he knows the nominee agreement exists." The man slammed the table. The dull sound passed through the door. "Why the hell didn't you say that earlier? I only just confirmed it." Fiona's voice also grew anxious. "Otherwise, why would I risk going back to the old house to get the originals? You think I want to get involved in this mess? I did everything you asked me to do. Felix's side is already broken. What use is slamming the table at me now?" The man pressed down his anger. His voice dropped, colder than before. "That original cannot remain in his hands. Find a way tonight to get Claire Chen's backup too. Claire Chen is not easy to deal with. That is your matter." The man's voice carried naked command. "You took the money. Finish the job. Sylvia Sun laid this road for this day. You don't want Vivian Wen to know what her mother did, do you?" Fiona did not argue again. Inside the room, only the sound of papers being placed back into the bag remained. Adrian stood outside. His hand hung at his side. His knuckles slowly tightened. He recognized that voice. That man's accent. Word choice. The rhythm when he slammed the table. He had heard it for a year. During the 12 months he was still One Group's strategic consultant, this person had attended 3 board meetings as a third-party consultant. Each time, he sat in the corner. Rarely spoke. Smiled politely. But Adrian remembered the name. In Daniel's penetration report on Felix Pay's funds, the final destination account of that 17 million yuan transfer belonged to this person. Jason Jiang. Former strategic consultant of One Group. Resigned 3 years ago on the surface, with no further connection to One Group. But Felix Pay had entered One Group through his recommendation. Fiona Fong's employment channel had also been built by him. Adrian slowly retreated 2 steps, turned, and walked downstairs. His steps remained steady, as if he had heard nothing. When he exited the tea house, night had already fallen. Streetlights glowed warm yellow, stretching his shadow long. He stood on the steps, took out his phone, and sent Daniel one message. Fiona Fong has the original nominee agreement. Jason Jiang is in Lotus Room, 2nd floor. After sending, he put away his phone and walked into the night wind back to the car. The door closed. Daniel looked back at him. How is it? Adrian leaned against the seat. His Adam's apple moved once. His voice was flat, as if nothing had happened. Do not touch either for now. Let them leave. The document in Fiona's hand cannot run. What next? Adrian looked out the car window at the 2nd floor window of the tea house. The light was still on. Back to the hotel. One Group has been calling all day, Daniel said. Director Zhou said Vivian's condition is not very good. Let her call. Adrian withdrew his gaze. His voice was cold and stable. The more she calls, the more she understands what she still has. Tomorrow morning, hang the Mingyuan capital sign publicly. Daniel froze. You want to go public? Adrian said, it is time for them to know who has been playing this game from beginning to end. The car started and slowly entered the night. The light in the tea house's 2nd floor window remained on for a long time before going out. In the North City Hotel suite, Adrian stood before the window and watched the thousands of city lights. There was no triumph in his eyes. No relief. Only a deep calm. He knew tonight would not stay calm for long. Fiona had taken the originals. Jason Jiang would not sit and wait. Vivian would eventually discover that the old house had been touched. But all those lines would surface tomorrow morning. Because the ultimate beneficial owner behind the 18 withdrawal letters would stand before everyone in another form. Not as Adrian Shaw, the consultant kicked out of the game. But as Adrian Shaw, sole controller of Mingyuan Capital. At 7 o'clock the next morning. One Group headquarters. President's office. Vivian had fallen asleep on the desk. She had barely closed her eyes the night before. Board calls continued until 2 in the morning. None of the 6 banks had agreed. 5 suppliers had formally paused deliveries. Semi-finished products piled in the warehouse until there was barely space to walk. Fiona was absent. She did not show up all day. When Vivian woke, her neck was stiff as rusted steel. She rubbed her temples and glanced at her phone. 7:12, several unread messages. All bad news. Huacheng had completely cut contact. The rating agency might downgrade One Group again today. One ongoing project had already halted because funding broke. She took a deep breath, stood, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Morning light entered the office, shining on the documents across the desk, making them painfully white. She held the window frame and watched people beginning to enter below. Suddenly, the building felt like a giant shell. Every person walking in was doing their work according to routine. But the skeleton of the whole tower was shaking. And she was the first person to feel it. At 7:30, the office phone rang. Vivian answered. It was the front desk. President Wan, someone delivered something and said you must sign personally. What is it? A large envelope. There is no sender information outside, but there is a line written on the seal. What line? The receptionist paused. It says, to President Vivian Wan of One Group personally. From Mingyuan Capital. Vivian's hand froze. Mingyuan Capital. She had never seen this name before. At least not in any investor list she controlled. But now it appeared at such a delicate moment. Her back instinctively tightened. Bring it up. 5 minutes later, the envelope was delivered. Vivian closed the door, opened the seal, and pulled out what was inside. A thin piece of paper. The header read, Minuan Capital Management Company, Limited. The body contained only several lines. The wording was almost absurdly polite. Dear Ms. Vivian 1, our company serves as the underlying capital contribution and management channel for WIN Group's 18 external investment entities, and the sole aggregator of all hidden capital injections into your company. Due to changes in related cooperation conditions, our company has coordinated the exit process. To facilitate follow-up communication, we hereby notify you, all withdrawal matters concerning the 18 investors shall be handled through our company uniformly. For inquiries, please contact the following address during business hours: General Manager's Office, Minuan Capital, number 88 Bin Road, North City. Below was an address and phone number. Vivian stared at the page for more than 10 seconds. Her fingers wrinkled the corner of the paper. She finally understood. The 18 withdrawal letters yesterday were not independent. Not coincidental. Behind them stood a unified capital exit. And now that exit had actively revealed itself. It was telling her, you may come negotiate with me. But the question was, who would negotiate? She grabbed the office phone and dialed the number. It rang 6 times and connected. Hello, General Manager's Office of Minuan Capital. I am Vivian 1, President of WIN Group. I want to see your General Manager. The other side went quiet for 1 second, then said, do you have an appointment? No, I apologize. Our General Manager's schedule is full today. If you have urgent matters, you may leave contact information, and I will pass it on. Vivian pressed down the fire in her throat. Then tell him the president of WIN Group wants to discuss the withdrawal of 18 investors. All right. I will relay it. But I need to remind you that our general manager is not in office from 9 to 11 o'clock this morning. The earliest confirmation would be this afternoon. Where is he? I apologize. That is an internal arrangement and cannot be disclosed. The call ended. Vivian gripped the receiver, knuckles white. She stood there and suddenly felt like someone being choked. She did not even know where the other party was. She could only wait until they were willing to see her. She paced around the office 3 times. Then stopped. Picked up her phone. Opened the number she had not dared dial again for an entire day and night. Adrian Shaw. She stared at his name for a long time. Her thumb hovered over the dial button. Then, from the corner of her eye, she caught sight of the Minuan Capital letter on the desk. A thought struck her like lightning. Minuan. Minuan. Adrian's mother had once run a company called Minuan Industrial. Vivian's breathing stopped for half a beat. Almost instinctively, she threw the phone back onto the desk. The back of her hand hit the cup. Coffee spilled and slowly spread across the edge of the letter. She did not wipe it. Only stared hard at those 2 characters, as if trying to force an answer out of them. Minuan. That company name had disappeared after Adrian's mother died. Now, it had returned. She picked up the phone and called legal. Find the industrial registration information for Minuan Capital Management Company, Limited. As fast as possible. 5 minutes later, legal called back. President 1, we found it. Minuan Capital Management Company, Limited. Registered 6 months ago. Registered capital, 100 million yuan. Legal representative, Adrian Shaw. The office was as quiet as a grave. Vivian slowly lowered the phone from her ear and stood with her hand at her side for a long time. Then she let out a very soft laugh. There was no pleasure in that sound. Only an absurdity so ironic even she felt it. 6 months ago. That was when Felix Pei had only been in the company for 2 months and was preparing to propose the governance optimization plan to her. And Adrian, at that time, still sat punctually at the end of every board meeting, reading contracts for her, calculating accounts for her, and blocking board pressure for her. He had begun laying this game 6 months ago. And she only read its name on a letter today. Legal added, President 1, one more thing. Minuan Capital's registered address, number 88 Bin Road in North City, is also Adrian Shaw's personal property. Vivian said nothing. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the rising sun outside. Golden light fell across her face. but it brought no warmth. So he had always been sitting beside the chessboard. And she had thought she was the one holding the pieces. From beginning to end, she was only the piece that jumped the loudest on the board. At 7:58, she put down her phone, picked up her handbag, and strode out. President 1. Director Zhou had just come from the corridor. Seeing her state, he froze slightly. Where are you going? North City. Vivian did not look back. Number 88 Bin Road. Director Zhou blocked her path. You are going alone? If not alone, who should I bring? Vivian stopped and looked back. The corner of her mouth pulled into something that was not a smile. If I bring people, will he see me? Director Zhou was silent for several seconds. Then said, I'll go with you. Vivian looked at him for 2 seconds and did not refuse. The two entered the elevator, one after the other. The doors closed. The numbers fell floor by floor. In the elevator mirror, Vivian saw her face. No makeup. Dark blue under her eyes. Dry cracked lips. So disheveled that she no longer bothered to cover it. But her eyes were straight. Not the scattered emptiness of someone beaten down and giving up. It was the sharpness of someone forced into a corner, and finally calm. The elevator reached the first floor. She walked out, crossed the lobby, pushed open the door, and walked into the wind. Director Zhou followed at her side and said something quietly. She did not hear it. Only one thought remained in her mind. She had to see Adrian Shaw. Even if he refused to meet her, she would stand before that door and demand one answer from him. What he owed her was not 21 billion yuan. It was every truth he had never spoken over those 7 years. Number 88 Bin Road, North City. A 12-story office building. Ordinary exterior. The glass curtain wall reflected cold morning light. The lobby was not grand. There was only one dark wooden front desk. Behind it sat a young woman. When she saw Vivian and Director Zhou enter, she stood and bowed politely. Hello. Do you have an appointment? No, Vivian said. I'm looking for Adrian Shaw. The receptionist's face did not change, as if she had expected someone to come. I apologize. Mr. Shaw is in a meeting right now. You may sit in the lobby waiting area first. After the meeting ends, I will help relay your arrival. Tell him Vivian 1 is here. The receptionist paused. Her gaze lingered on Vivian's face for a moment. Then she nodded. All right. I will relay it. She picked up the phone and spoke quietly. After hanging up, she gestured to Vivian. Mr. Shaw asks you to go up. 12th floor. Turn left. First room. Vivian turned toward the elevator. Director Zhou followed and said quietly, he was prepared. I know. Vivian pressed the 12th floor button. Watching the numbers rise, her voice was flatter than she recognized. He let me come up because he wants me to see everything. The elevator doors opened. The 12th floor corridor was very quiet. Dark gray carpet covered the ground. Both sides were glass-partitioned offices. The first door on the left was half open. Vivian walked to it and knocked twice. Come in. She pushed open the door. The office was neither large nor small. The floor-to-ceiling windows faced the river. The light was good. Behind the desk sat Adrian. Before him lay a stack of documents. Beside his hand was untouched coffee. He wore a dark blue shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked more relaxed than she remembered seeing him in years. Not like a man forced into a dead end. More like someone who had always been sitting here, and today had finally lifted the curtain. Sit. He pointed to the chair opposite. Vivian walked in and sat. Director Zhou stood at the door and did not enter. He only closed the door behind her. The office was left with the two of them. Face to face. The last time they had sat like this was at that 12-person table. He had sat at the end. She had sat at the main seat. At that time, she had looked at him like a redundant item to be optimized away. Now, looking at him, she realized she did not even know what pen he was holding. Mingyuan Capital. Vivian opened with no greeting. It's you. Adrian closed the file in front of him and set it aside. He lifted his eyes to her. It's me. You started preparing 6 months ago? About that. Felix Pei had only been in the company 2 months. Vivian stared at him. Her eyes were bloodshot, but her voice was stable. You already knew what he was going to do? Adrian leaned back in his chair and looked at her calmly. As if looking at someone who had finally asked the right question. When Felix entered the company is not important. What matters is when you began to believe him. Vivian's throat tightened. She could not answer. You believed his governance optimization. You believed his clarity of authority and responsibility. You believed his line that the company does not operate on sentiment. Adrian's tone was light when he said those words. No sarcasm. Not even blame. Only stating facts. You believed him enough to raise that hand in the meeting. So whether I prepared earlier or later, what difference does it make? Vivian was silent for several seconds. So in these 7 years, all the things you thought I did not ask about, you were actually waiting for this moment? No, Adrian said, in those 7 years, I never thought of moving against one group. But when you invited me out, I had to leave myself a path. A path? Vivian could not hold back anymore. Her voice rose slightly. You cut one group's entire financing chain, withdrew all suppliers, pressed all bank loans back onto us, and you call that leaving yourself a path? Adrian looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved as if he wanted to say something. In the end, he only said, then if you were in my seat yesterday, and the entire board voted you out, what path would you leave? Vivian opened her mouth. No answer came. Because she had sat in that seat all day in her mind. She knew if it were her, she would not have had the patience to wait until the next morning to act. Vivian won. Adrian called her name. Not President One. Not anything else. Just her full name. I told you one thing on the phone yesterday. Today, in front of you, I will say it again. He leaned forward slightly. His hands crossed on the desk. His gaze locked directly onto hers. In these 7 years, you never asked me who I was. The office was quiet for more than 10 seconds. Outside, the river flowed very softly. Like time slipping away little by little. Vivian lowered her head and looked at her hands on her lap. Her nails were cut short. Her palms still had red marks pressed by a pen. She was silent for a long time. So long that Adrian thought she would not speak again. Then she said, Fiona Fong is from the old house side. Adrian's eyelids moved. I only learned this morning that she had taken leave. Vivian lifted her face and looked at him. Her eyes carried exhaustion, but more than that, a kind of clarity after accepting the truth. My mother approved her entry into the company. After I took over, I kept using her because she was efficient and never made mistakes. But yesterday, she did not come to work. This morning, I checked her access records and discovered she went to the old house last night. Adrian said nothing. My mother left some things there. I have never seen them. Vivian said, Fiona knows where they are. She guarded them for 3 years, probably thinking I would never investigate. You investigated? Not yet. Vivian shook her head. A faint self-mocking curve appeared on her lips. I came to you first. Adrian looked into her eyes. Vivian felt uncomfortable under that gaze and slightly turned her face away. You don't need to look at me like that. I didn't come to beg you to withdraw the letters. Nor did I come to beg you to return one group to me. I came to ask you one question. Ask. When Jason Jiang recommended Felix pay to one group, did you already know Fiona Fong had a problem? Adrian looked at her for 2 seconds. Then said, I knew she had a channel. But I did not know where that channel led. Then why didn't you tell me? If I told you, would you have believed me? That sentence was a nail driven precisely into every arrogant crack she had built over 7 years. She wanted to argue. Wanted to say, if you had told me, I would have listened. But what surfaced in her mind was Adrian's silence in board meeting after board meeting. West City Warehouse. Southern Raw Material Chain. Overseas OEM divestment. Those proposals he had raised, only to be pressed back by her or Felix with one sentence. Not adopted. At the time, she thought he was conservative, stubborn, not aggressive enough. Now, thinking back, under every one of those, not adopted, proposals was an invisible thread. And hanging from each thread was one group's cash flow for an entire year. Vivian closed her eyes. When she opened them, her whole aura had changed. Much of that presidential coldness had faded. Replacing it was a tired honesty close to acceptance. Fiona Fong sent me a message this morning. She took out her phone, swiped twice, and turned the screen toward Adrian. Look. Adrian looked down. Only one line was on the screen. Sent at 6:52 a.m., President One, I'm sorry. I guarded some things for Aunt's son for 3 years. Now it is time to return them. Before I leave, I will send all materials and originals in my hands to your office. I wish you well. Below was a courier tracking number. The company was North City Express. Adrian finished reading and pushed the phone back to her. You believe her? Half. Vivian said, I believe she will send the materials back. But before leaving, she almost certainly let Jason Jiang see them once. Adrian's brow moved almost imperceptibly. You know Jason Jiang? Found out last night. Vivian said, I had Director Zhou pull Fiona's bank records and communications. The final destination of Felix's 17 million also fell under Jason Jiang's name. The office was silent for a moment. Adrian looked at Vivian. For the first time, the coldness in his gaze loosened by a tiny crack. He had thought Vivian came today to beg him to save one group. To lower her head. To admit defeat. But sitting in that chair, her first sentence did not mention financing. Her second did not mention Huacheng. Her third did not mention the 21 billion yuan hole. She mentioned Fiona Fong. The old house. Jason Jiang. That meant before coming today, she had finished her own homework. Adrian leaned back. Something entered his eyes that he thought would never be there again. It was too faint for even him to fully notice. What do you plan to do with the materials Fiona sends back? Vivian met his gaze. Her voice was not loud, but every word was clear. What should be made public will be made public. What should be liquidated will be liquidated. I will not hide what my mother did. But I am still steering one group. Even if only 70% of the skeleton remains, I do not want it to sink in my hands. She paused and looked at him. So I need you to tell me. The path you said you left, how much room is left? Adrian looked at her for a long time. Then he opened the drawer on his right, took out a document, and pushed it across the desk. Vivian took it and opened it. Page 1, Mingyuan Capital Intent Letter to Suspend Withdrawal Execution. Page 2, Temporary Guarantee Extension Plan for Huacheng Project. Page 3, Confirmation Letters Opening Negotiation Channels with 6 banks. 3 documents. Every page already signed. The seal date was 6 o'clock that morning. When she had still been sleeping on the desk in her office, he had already prepared all of these. Vivian turned page by page. Her fingertips trembled slightly. Her voice was hoarse. I am not here to save you. Adrian interrupted her. His tone was as flat as if discussing a contract. One group is not mine alone. Among the 18 investors, half wanted to leave on their own. The other half I can temporarily hold down. I give you these documents because the projects you completed in these 7 years were indeed half your own ability. I do not deny that. But the other half you owe me an explanation. Vivian closed the file and held it against herself. Her head lowered. Her shoulders slightly collapsed. I know, she said. After a long silence, she suddenly asked something completely unrelated to business. You are still staying at the hotel? Adrian paused. That marital apartment. She did not lift her head. Her voice was muffled. Do you want to come back? I did not move any of your things. Adrian looked at the top of her lowered head. For a long time, he was silent. Let's talk later. He did not say yes. He did not say no. But Vivian heard no rejection in those words. She stood with the 3 documents in her arms. At the door, she stopped. Without turning back, she said softly, when Fiona's materials arrive, I'll send you a copy. Adrian Shaw. I'm sorry. She said nothing more. She opened the door and left. The door closed behind her. The office returned to silence. Only the faint sound of the river flowing outside the window remained. Adrian sat there and looked at the closed door. The coffee beside his hand had gone cold. He did not drink it. Sunlight entered through the window and fell across his cuff. Warm. He sat for a while, then opened the drawer and took out a photocopy of the nominee agreement. He placed it on the desk. Then picked up a pen and wrote a note at the footer, need to confirm whether Sylvia Sun transferred voting rights before death. After writing, he put the file away again, leaned back in the chair, and closed his eyes. The first round of the day was over. But the real liquidation was still ahead. Because no one knew how many hidden moves Sylvia Sun had buried in the materials Fiona Fong sent back. And how many pages Jason Jiang had already turned before Fiona left. That was what Adrian cared about most now. Fiona's package arrived at One Group's front desk at 5:42 that afternoon. When Vivian received the notice, she was sitting in the president's office. Before her lay the 3 documents Adrian had given her that morning. Beside them sat Director Zhou's newly organized audit report on Felix Pay. She picked up the courier box brought up by the front desk, tore away the craft paper outside, and found a black hard-shell file box inside. A note was stuck to the seal. Fiona's handwriting. Only one sentence: all originals are here. Aunt Sun instructed me that if one day you actively investigated, I should give everything to you. Vivian removed the note and opened the box. Inside lay more than a dozen files neatly arranged in chronological order. The earliest was the original nominee agreement signed 21 years ago between Sylvia Sun and Sean Shaw. The paper had yellowed. The edges were brittle. Behind it were voting right exercise records over the years, dividend flow records, supplementary equity transfer agreements, and 3 handwritten letters. Vivian picked up the top letter and opened it. It was her mother's handwriting. Dated. Her mother's handwriting had always been beautiful. Even casual records were neat and elegant. But the contents of the letter chilled Vivian from head to toe. Vivian, if you are seeing this letter, it means I am gone, and you have begun investigating these things. Mom wants to confess several things to you. Perhaps you will hate me. But you must know the truth. First, the 6.3% of Shaw family shares I held as nominee was never touched by me while I was alive. But I held the voting rights for 19 years. In those 19 years, I used those voting rights 3 times. All 3 were to prevent one group from being swallowed by external capital at critical moments. You may call me selfish. But one group's stability was obtained by using these things. Second, Fiona Fong was arranged into one group by me. Her mother was once my assistant. Before she died, she entrusted Fiona to me. Fiona knew what was locked inside the old house. I asked her to guard it not against you, but against people outside. If you hate her, do not be too harsh. She was only fulfilling a responsibility I could not personally tell you. Third, about Adrian Shaw. Vivian's hand paused as she turned to the next page. His mother, Celia Chen, and I were old acquaintances. After the Chen family incident, Sean Shaw wanted to swallow back those shares. It was Celia herself who came to me and asked me to hold them as nominee. She said, I trust you with them. Yenzhou did not know about this. At least, before I died, he did not know. If you are still willing to treat him kindly, Mom begs you, do not judge your 7 years by the affairs of the previous generation. The letter had no signature. Only a date. 2 months before Sylvia Sun passed away. Vivian folded the letter carefully and placed it on the desk. She looked out at the darkening sky for a long time. She had thought her mother left behind a cold financial draft. A will about equity, interests, and calculation. But after reading these 3 pages, the anger of being used slowly faded. What replaced it was something more complicated. Her mother had calculated. But not for herself. For the one family. And also to keep a promise to Celia Chen. Vivian placed the letter back into the file box and continued flipping. The final pages were Shaw Holdings shareholder resolutions and voting records organized by Sylvia while alive. Every page was labeled, Exercise of Nominee Voting Rights. Vivian scanned through them and discovered that the 6.3% shares had indeed only been used 3 times in 21 years. Each time coincided with one group's survival points. The final use was 3 years ago. That year, when group's cash flow had been at its tightest. 2 external funds wanted to acquire the core business division at a depressed valuation. Sylvia had been critically ill then, but still signed a voting authorization from her hospital bed, casting the entire 6.3% voting power against the acquisition proposal. Vivian turned to that attachment. Seeing the signing date, she suddenly remembered something. That year, she and Adrian had just married. During the most chaotic month at one group, Adrian did not come home for an entire week. At the time, she thought he was fighting the board. Now she understood. He had been shielding her in ways she had never known. And she had not even said, "You worked hard." Vivian closed the file box and sat for several minutes. Then she took out her phone and called Director Zhou. The package arrived. "Tomorrow, arrange a time to convene the full board. I have something to disclose." Director Zhou was silent for a moment. "Are you sure? Once these things are disclosed, part of one group's equity structure over the past 20 years must be recalculated." "Then recalculate it." Vivian's voice did not waver. I will not hide this for my mother. What belongs to the Shaw family must be returned. What belongs to one group must be signed and confirmed again. Only when accounts are clear can people stand straight. Director Zhou was silent for several seconds. Then he said quietly, "All right." After hanging up, Vivian sat for a while longer. Then she picked up the file box and locked it inside the safe under her desk. She stood and went to the window, looking at the city night already fully dark outside. Suddenly, she remembered what Adrian had said that morning. "You never asked me who I was." She had indeed never asked. But now, she did not want to wait anymore. Vivian picked up her phone and opened Adrian's number. This time, she did not hesitate. She dialed directly. It rang 3 times. Connected. "It's me," she said. The other side was quiet for 1 second. I finished reading Fiona's materials. There are some things about your mother. Are you free to come look tomorrow?" Adrian was silent for a few breaths. As if surprised. And yet as if he had expected it. "I can. Then tomorrow morning at 10. My office." "All right." The call was short. No extra greeting. No extra testing. But when Vivian put down the phone, she realized the corners of her mouth had curved slightly at some point. She could not clearly say why. Perhaps because of the final line in her mother's letter, "If you are still willing to treat him kindly, Mom begs you." She was willing. At least, she wanted to try. The next morning at 10. The door to One Group's president's office was open. Vivian sat on the sofa. On the coffee table before her was the black file box, already open. When Adrian walked in, she stood to greet him. Her movement was much more natural than yesterday. At least she was no longer holding documents with trembling hands. "Sit." She pointed to the sofa opposite and sat first. Adrian sat across from her. His gaze landed on the file box. He did not immediately reach for it. Vivian pushed the box toward him. "You know your mother's handwriting. The voting records and dividend flows beneath, I have not touched. See for yourself." Adrian took out the original nominee agreement on top and flipped through it. Then he picked up Sylvia's letter to Vivian and read it from beginning to end. He read carefully. Word by word. Skipped no line. When he reached the part about Celia Chen on the 3rd page, his fingers paused slightly around the paper. Then returned to normal. After finishing, he placed the letter back and looked at Vivian. "What do you plan to do?" "This afternoon's board meeting." Vivian said, "I will disclose these materials in front of all directors. The shares that should be returned to your mother will be signed and confirmed again. The equity structure that should be recalculated will be recalculated. I will not hide what my mother did." Adrian looked at her for several seconds. "Do you know what that means?" "I know." Vivian nodded. "One group's visible control structure may change. But I can handle it. What belongs to whom belongs to whom." Adrian did not press further. He lowered his head and picked up the nominee agreement again, turning to the final page. His eyes fell on the handwritten supplement. "All voting rights and disposal rights arising from shares held under this agreement belong to the nominee holder." He stared at it for a long time. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud, but Vivian heard it clearly. "Your mother gave you a choice." Vivian froze. What choice? The 3 times she reserved voting rights, she used them all to block acquisitions for One Group. But she never touched the shares themselves. Never transferred them out. Adrian placed the agreement back into the box. She left something behind, but she did not turn it into a weapon. You should know that. Vivian was silent for a few seconds. Then she lowered her head. Her voice was muffled. I know. The office was quiet for a while. Then Adrian said, I signed a new guarantee letter for watching this morning. Mingyuan Capital will assume the original guarantee responsibility. The project can resume. Vivian lifted her head sharply. When did you sign it? 6 this morning. Again, before she arrived at the company. Vivian's lips moved. She wanted to say something, but in the end, only one line came out. You always get up this early? Habit. Adrian said. I used to wake early for your morning meetings. Later, I never changed. He said it like an ordinary daily statement. No intention of claiming credit. But in Vivian's ears, it struck something gently in her chest. How many morning meetings had he rushed through for her over 7 years? How many contracts had he changed? How many doubts had he blocked? She had never counted them. Because every time, he finished silently and placed the work on her desk. When she saw it, she thought it had been organized by the secretariat. She looked up at Adrian and suddenly noticed the button on his shirt cuff seemed loose. Whether it had been loose yesterday or only today, she did not know. "Your shirt," she pointed at his cuff. "The button is loose." Adrian looked down. "Oh. I can sew it for you." The words left Vivian's mouth before she realized what she had said. A little awkwardly, she withdrew her hand. "I mean, there's a sewing kit in the office cabinet." Adrian looked at that unnatural expression. At last, the corner of his mouth lifted into a tiny curve. "All right." Vivian stood and went to the cabinet to search for the sewing kit. With her back to Adrian, she heard him say softly, "Vivian won." Why are you nervous?" Vivian turned around with the sewing kit in hand. The tips of her ears were slightly red. But her mouth remained stubborn. "I'm not nervous. Your hands were shaking when you opened the cabinet. That's because I didn't sleep well yesterday." "All right." Adrian did not expose her further. He simply stretched out his cuff and quietly waited for her to sew the button. Vivian sat and lowered her head to thread the needle. Her movements were not especially skilled, but steady. A coffee table stood between them. Neither spoke. Only the needle and thread passing through fabric made small, gentle sounds. When she finished, she bit off the thread and leaned back slightly to inspect it. "Done." Adrian withdrew his hand and moved the cuff. "Thank you." "You're welcome." A brief silence again. Then Adrian stood and adjusted his shirt. "The board meeting this afternoon. You go." "I will not attend." Vivian looked at him. "You're not coming?" "That is when group's board meeting." He said, "It is not appropriate for me to be there. After you disclose what should be disclosed, and re-sign what should be re-signed, when group's part will be finished. After that, Minuan Capital can sit down with you and discuss cooperation." Vivian looked at him. "Cooperation?" Adrian said, "Not superior and subordinate. Not husband and wife. Cooperation." Vivian understood the boundary in his words. And she understood the room left inside it. He gave her a new path. No longer as the husband of one group's president, covering for her, but as the controller of Minuan Capital, standing with her on opposite sides of an equal chessboard. She thought for a moment and nodded. "All right." At the door, Adrian looked back at her. "Do not be afraid at the afternoon meeting." Vivian stood beside the desk, holding the needle she had just used. She looked at him and curved her mouth. "I'm not afraid anymore." Adrian nodded, opened the door, and left. The office became quiet again. Vivian looked down at the needle in her hand. A short piece of dark blue thread remained at its tip. She carefully wound it back and placed it into the sewing kit. Then closed the cabinet. Outside, sunlight was just right. It fell across the cover of the disclosure materials on her desk. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, in this room, a true liquidation would happen. And she was ready. At exactly 2 p.m., when Group Headquarters' main conference room was full. This time, there was no seat for Felix Pay. The former deputy director, already suspended for audit, was now undergoing full investigation with legal's cooperation. At the long table, besides board executives, one more person sat on Vivian's right, Director Zhou. Before him lay a 30-page disclosure package. Vivian stood at the main seat. She had no script. No projection. Only the black file box placed on the table. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Not a trace of tremor. "I convened everyone today for one matter." She opened the box, took out the yellowed original nominee agreement on top, placed it on the table, and pushed it forward. "My mother, Sylvia Sun, held Early Shaw Holdings shares as nominee in her personal capacity 21 years ago. The shares accounted for 6.3% of total capital at that time. During the nominee period, voting rights were in her hands. The shares were never transferred. I did not know about this before. I disclose it today to make clear how part of one group's past 20-year equity structure came to exist." A small disturbance rose in the room. Some people checked their phones. Some whispered. But no one stood to interrupt her. Vivian continued, "My mother used those voting rights 3 times while alive. All records are attached. You may verify them yourselves. I am not here to defend myself. Nor to cover for her. Shares belong where they belong. This afternoon, we'll sign and confirm." She distributed the materials to every director present, including those who usually opposed her. After one person finished reading, he lifted his head and asked, "President 1, you mean when group will surrender this part of the shares?" "Yes," Vivian said. "Direct transfer to Adrian Shaw's name." "Then when group's equity structure will adjust," Vivian interrupted. Her tone was neither soft nor hard. "But when group itself will not be affected. Mingyuan Capital has already confirmed that the withdrawal suspension and watching guarantee extension will begin at the same time. As long as we straighten out the internal accounts, external channels can reopen." The meeting room went quiet again. This silence was different from yesterday's panic. It was a complicated silence. Some people relaxed. Some lowered their heads in thought. Some looked at Vivian several times, as if re-evaluating this president. Director Zhou was the first to speak. "I agree." One after another, board members nodded. It was not unanimous raised hands. But no one opposed. Vivian watched them state their positions. There was no panic like yesterday. No pride like today. Only a grounded feeling. She had finally placed this account under the sun. No longer needing to hide in fear inside the shadow her mother left behind. After the meeting, Vivian returned to her office and found an extra letter on the desk. No signature on the envelope. The postmark was from that day. Inside was only one sheet of paper. Fiona's handwriting. "President 1, you should have finished reading the materials. I am at the airport, preparing to stay overseas for a while. No need to look for me. I have repaid part of what I owed. I will slowly repay the rest myself. Your mother was kind to me. I guarded those things for her for 3 years, and it was not for nothing. I wish you and Mr. Shaw well." There was no name at the end. Only a tiny drawn flower. Vivian looked at that flower. The corner of her mouth curved. She folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. Then picked up her phone and dialed a number. The call connected. Adrian's voice came through. "The meeting is over?" "Over." Vivian said, "The share transfer confirmation documents have been signed. Legal and finance will coordinate the follow-up. Adrian Shaw. Are you free tonight?" The other side was quiet for 2 seconds. Vivian pursed her lips. Her voice lowered a little. "That marital apartment, I want you to come back and take a look." The phone was silent for several seconds. Then Adrian asked, "What time?" "Whenever you get off work. I'll leave early today." "All right." After hanging up, Vivian stood in the office and looked at the evening sky outside. She took a deep breath. This day felt extremely long. And extremely short. Long like a whole year had passed. Short like every word she said and every decision she made had happened in an instant. She left work early. Drove back to the East City apartment where she had lived for 3 years. When she pushed open the door, the entryway light was still on. She changed shoes and walked in. On the living room coffee table sat 2 books. They belonged to the set of economics texts Adrian used to read. She did not know when someone had returned them. She walked over, picked up one, and flipped through it. One page was folded. Inside the folded corner was a sticky note. Adrian's handwriting. "There are a few more in the study. I'll move them back tomorrow." No signature. No explanation. Vivian stared at the note for several seconds. Then smiled and placed it back between the pages. She set the book down and turned into the kitchen. She tied on an apron and opened the refrigerator. In the freezer was a pack of dumplings she had made last month. On the bag was a date label, "For Adrian Shaw. Remember, less spicy." She smiled and took the dumplings out. Tonight, they would eat this. When Adrian arrived, the door was already open. He entered and saw Vivian cooking dumplings in the kitchen. Steam bubbled from the pot. He stood at the kitchen doorway and watched her for a few seconds. He said nothing. He took off his coat, placed it over the back of a chair, and walked over to take the bowls and chopsticks for her. "You're back?" she asked without turning. The dumplings are almost ready. I can smell them." The two worked together in the kitchen. Serving dumplings. Pouring vinegar. Passing chopsticks. Their movements were not yet fully tacit, but there was no longer that careful testing. When they sat across from each other to eat, the light was warm yellow. Steam rose from the dumplings. Outside the window, night had fully fallen. Halfway through the meal, Vivian suddenly said, "Felix Pay's audit report is out." Adrian's chopsticks paused. What result? Involved amount, 32 million yuan. In addition to the 17 million transfer, there were several budget fees extracted in batches. Legal has transferred the case to economic investigation. Adrian nodded. What about Jason Jiang? He left the country overnight yesterday. Vivian said, but before leaving, part of his fund chain was frozen. I have begun cross-border recovery. He cannot run far. Adrian thought for a moment and placed down his chopsticks. Did he contact you before leaving? No, Vivian shook her head. Director Zhou intercepted 2 overseas call records. One to Felix Pay. One to an offshore account. We have not identified the account name yet, but the money did not transfer out. It was frozen. Then he has not run far. Adrian picked up his cup and drank water. I'll have Daniel Side connect with your legal team. They have more experience with cross-border tracing. Faster than when group fighting alone. Vivian lifted her eyes to him. You are willing to let Mingyuan Capital's people connect with Wen Group's legal team? Why not? Adrian said, 2 companies cooperating. He said it flatly. But Vivian heard a certain loosening inside the word, cooperating. It was no longer a cold business term. It was a new way of rebuilding between them. No longer one person covering everything for the other. But 2 people standing straight on their own, then walking forward side by side. After dinner, Vivian cleared the bowls. Adrian did not leave. He sat on the living room sofa and flipped through that economics text. When he reached the sticky note, his movement paused. He looked at the line he had written, there are a few more in the study. I'll move them back tomorrow. The corner of his mouth lifted faintly. You put this here? He asked. Vivian answered from the kitchen while washing her hands. You put it there yourself. When did I? Last week, when you came to pick up documents. Vivian wiped her hands and walked out, leaning against the kitchen doorway to look at him. You probably forgot. Adrian looked down at the note. He truly did not remember. At that time, he had still been thinking about how to straighten out all of Mingyuan Capital's channels. He had not even noticed what he had written. But Vivian had kept it. And put it back into the book. As if she had picked up this small thing he forgot and placed it away properly for him. He looked at the note. Suddenly, he felt that some things did not need to be said too clearly. Tomorrow is the weekend, he said. Then I'll move those books back tomorrow. Vivian smiled. I'll clear space on the shelf for you. 1 month later. Wen Group headquarters. Main conference room. Today was not a board meeting. It was a public strategic cooperation signing ceremony. 2 rows of people sat on either side of the long table. One side was Wen Group's main board members. The other side was Mingyuan Capital's executive team. At the signing seats, there were only 2 chairs. On the left sat Vivian Wen. On the right sat Adrian Shaw. Reporters and invited partners sat below. Camera flashes lit up in bursts. Today, Wen Group and Mingyuan Capital sign a strategic cooperation agreement covering financing coordination, joint project investment, and supply chain sharing. The total amount is expected to be no less than 15 billion yuan. After the host finished reading the official release, he handed the microphone to Vivian. Vivian stood. She did not look at a script. Her gaze swept across the audience. Then she turned slightly and looked at Adrian beside her. Over the past month, Wen Group experienced some changes. Some people left. Some people returned. Some accounts had to be settled. Some roads had to be walked again. She paused. Her tone was not heavy, but the room became quiet. I thank Mr. Shaw for his honesty and restraint during this period. And I thank him for being willing to sit down and talk again. She handed the microphone to Adrian. Adrian stood. Today, he wore a dark gray suit. Compared with the day he had been voted out of the meeting room, he looked much more relaxed. He took the microphone. His first sentence made the room quiet. I am not here to save Wen Group. His tone was calm, as if stating the weather. Wen Group can stabilize itself. In the past month, your president Wen has already proven that. Mingyuan Capital sits here today because we are optimistic about Wen Group's strategic direction going forward. This has nothing to do with private relationships. When he said, private relationships, his gaze lightly passed over Vivian. The corner of his mouth carried a curve so faint it was almost invisible. The reporters below caught that look. Camera shutters sounded again. After the signing ceremony, the crowd gradually left. Vivian stood by the side door of the venue, holding the pen that had just signed the agreement. When Adrian walked out from inside, she capped the pen and placed it into her pocket. "The official talk is over," she said softly. Adrian looked at her. "And then?" "Then we go home." Vivian said, "There are still dumplings from last time in the refrigerator. I made an extra drawer." Adrian smiled. "Less spicy?" "Less spicy." The two walked side by side through the corridor to the elevator. When the doors opened, Vivian entered first. Adrian followed. Only the two of them were inside. The floor numbers fell. When they reached the first floor, Vivian suddenly asked, "After your mother's shares are transferred, what do you plan to do with them?" "Keep them." Adrian said, "They are what she left me. Not something to cash out." The elevator doors opened. They walked out through the lobby. The sunlight outside was excellent, warmly falling across both their shoulders. Vivian lifted her hand to block the light. Then she turned her head and looked at Adrian. "Are you busy this afternoon?" "Team meeting at 4. He said, "But I'm free from 2 to 4. "Perfect." Vivian curved her lips. "Let's go home and finish the remaining half tray of dumplings. Last time you said the filling was bland. This time I added half a spoon more salt." Adrian opened the car door. Standing beside it, he looked at her. Sunlight fell across the side of his face. At last, there was something gentle in his eyes that had not been seen for a very long time. "All right." The car left when Group's Gate and merged into afternoon traffic. Outside the window, the city moved slowly backward. Vivian sat in the passenger seat, lowered the seat slightly, and closed her eyes to rest. "Tired?" Adrian glanced at her. "A little." She said, "I barely slept for the 3 days before the signing. Then rest first when we get back. We can make the dumplings later." Vivian opened her eyes and looked sideways at him. "When did you become so good at talking?" "I always was," Adrian said. "No one listened before." Vivian was blocked by that sentence. Then she laughed softly. "All right. In the future, I'll listen." The car fell quiet for a moment. Vivian looked ahead. There were many things she wanted to say. But she also felt there was no need to say all of them. The accounts that should be settled had been settled. The things that should be made public had been made public. What should end had ended. And what should begin again was beginning. She turned her head and looked at Adrian's profile as he drove. Suddenly, she felt that in this past month, she had finally understood many things. Some things could not be gained by grabbing. Nor by calculating. When Group was not her trophy. What her mother left behind was not a shackle. And Adrian Shaw was not a part of her life to be optimized away. He was simply a person. A person who had carried 7 years for her without ever saying he was tired. A person she had voted out of the room, yet who had still prepared the guarantee extension for her. A person who sat on the living room sofa flipping through a book and had forgotten the little note he had left inside. Vivian withdrew her gaze and looked toward the road ahead. The curve at the corner of her mouth never fell. Adrian Shaw. Let's go home." "All right." The car drove over a bridge. Sunlight slanted through the windshield. Warm like spring had arrived early. In the rearview mirror, when Group's headquarters grew farther and farther away. And ahead of them, the road was straight and wide. With no end in sight. That's all for today's story. Remember to subscribe and leave a comment.